Chapter 1563. Ko Jianghuai continued. The situation in Lu province is different from the eastern front of the Guangling path that I was at. Over there, it seems that there are many cities and passes, but they are all dead, like chess pieces on a chessboard that do not move once they take root. The generals of the Guangling army of the Liang imperial court have all walked into a dead end. As if they do not have a city, they do not have a soul. In Lu province, it is very different. This is a battlefield that is destined to be decided by the cavalry. The two garrisons of Linyao and Fengxiang are a small variable, while the backup that Lu Gui has hidden is a big variable. Similarly, it is a matter of saving a nearby fire from afar. Ko Jianghuai pointed to the east, even further east than the camp of Lu Gui's army. The true variable is in the hands of Beiliang. As long as Liang Zhou sends 10,000 cavalry to Lu province, they do not need to be the Great Snow Dragon Cavalry or the 6,000 Iron Stupas of Qidong. As long as it is the most ordinary cavalry of Liang Zhou, it will be enough. Yang Guangdou shook his head. Although I advocate defending Qingcang City to the death, I am also clear that the survival of Qingcang City cannot wait for the cavalry of Liang Zhou to hear the news and arrive. We can only rely on the 14,000 people in Qingcang City and the 30,000 Longxiang army outside the city. At most, we can add on the 7,000 to 8,000 cavalry from Linyao and Fengxiang. Ko Jianghuai laughed. In any case, we are already defending Qingcang City to the death. It is not a bad thing for us to think a little more. Ko Jianghuai turned his head to the worried Chen Shiliang and smiled. In order to calm the people and prevent them from collapsing in one battle, I will have to trouble Sir and those youths of Lu province to make a false military report. Just say that Beiliang's cavalry is on the way. As long as Qingcang City is not broken through in 5 days, not even a single Beimang barbarian will be able to stand in Lu province. Chen Shiliang's face was somewhat angry. Ko Jianghuai purposely ignored him and asked with a smile, "What, sir, you can't bear it? Do you feel that it goes against your conscience?" Actually, from another perspective, it was simple. Since they had to defend the city to the death regardless of whether or not there were reinforcements from the Liangzhou province, a high morale meant that fewer people would die than a low morale. Mr. didn't want Qingcang City to be breached in a day or two. How many times could the 14,000 people who were scattered in all directions withstand the killing of the Beimang army? Sir, you are a proper scholar, so you might not know much about military affairs. The battlefield where the most people die the fastest is not during the siege, nor is it when the cavalry forces clash or when the cavalry forces break through the infantry formation. Instead, it is the massacre after the city is breached, or the pursuit of the defeated soldiers in the wilderness. Chen Shiliang then asked 2 questions. General Ko is willing to fight to the death with Azure City? Are you really willing to die here? Ko Jianghuai seemed to be avoiding the important and dwelling on the trivial. His tone was calm as he said, I, Ko Jianghuai, came to Luzhou as the general of Luzhou to win the war. I am not afraid of death, but at the same time, I cherish my life. Chen Shiliang said his goodbyes and left. Ko Jianghuai smiled and didn't take it to heart. Yang Guangdou didn't follow Chen Shiliang down the city wall. He sighed and said, General Ko should be able to see that Chen Shiliang has already treated Qingcang City as his home in Luzhou. Why are you still rubbing salt on his wound? Moreover, with Chen Shiliang's temperament, once he has a bad impression of someone, it will be difficult to change it for the rest of his life. General Ko is also not doing business in Luzhou. You want to make a name for yourself here. Since that is the case, why do you still want to become enemies with Chen Shiliang? Ko Jianghuai asked back. Is Chen Shiliang just a gentleman who would rather take the easy way out? Yang Guangdou shook his head and said, that is looking down on him too much. Chen Shiliang might not necessarily be the next Li Yishan. Compared to Su Beiji, who is successful in Lingzhou, I am more optimistic about Chen Shiliang. Ko Jianghuai stretched out his hand and slid it across the slightly hot arrow stacks on the wall. He said softly, the spy report that Lu Zhou sent to Liangzhou is just to leave the rest to fate. I am betting that Liangzhou has someone who can see through the situation. In short, this time, Lu Zhou will either lose completely or make a huge profit. Yang Guangdou sighed. If only I had half a year to create a rough beacon system on the southern line of Lu Zhou, I would not be so passive. Unfortunately, time does not wait for me. Ko Jianghuai's eyes were complicated. No one knew what this general of Lu Zhou, who had taken over a hot potato the moment he took office, was planning. The Longxiang army camp south of Qingcang City was different from Lu Gui's army, which was filled with resentment and undercurrents. It was also different from the hesitation in Qingcang City. From top to bottom, the entire dragon elephant army didn't have any distracting thoughts. Last year they marched straight into northern Mang, practically sweeping through most of Gusai province, beating the 4 military towns of tile-building Gentleman's Pavilion, Ligu, and Maolong to the point where they wished they were dead. In the end, even Dong Zhuo had no choice but to personally take the field, yet they still lost around 5,000 elite private soldiers. At the beginning of spring this year, they had swallowed up over 8,000 Chong cavalry troops known as the Desert Ghosts in one go. The morale of the Dragon Elephant Army had been accumulated through victory after victory in such tough battles. Before Su Longxiang took command of the Dragon Elephant Cavalry, Deputy Generals Li Mofen and Scarface and Wang Lingbao were already border generals. In these 10 years, when did they not fight a few battles with the Beimang barbarians? The black-clothed teen sat on a small hill. Beside him lay the shockingly huge black tiger. It was lazily dozing off, occasionally shaking its body and kicking up a large cloud of dust. Li Mofen and Wang Lingbao each held their horses and stood not far away. The fierce-looking Scarface asked softly, "Looking at the situation, the Beimang barbarians are going to make their move tomorrow. We will definitely fight this battle. But how should we fight? Old Li, do you have any ideas?" Li Mofen's warhorse was like a mobile armory. Not only was there an iron spear hanging from it, there was also a riding bow and 2 light crossbows. There was also a pouch full of short halberds. Li Mofen himself was also carrying a sword. After hearing Wang Lingbao's question, this deputy general of the Longxiang army, who had a mixed reputation, said unhappily, "Ideas? The 30,000 Longxiang army is all cavalry. Isn't it just a cavalry versus cavalry? What other tricks can they play? That old man Lu Gue is clearly using Qingcang City as bait to catch a big fish like our Longxiang army. Then we will take the bait. However, we have to drag this fisherman into the water and tell them that it is not so easy to pull chestnuts out of the fire. It is very easy to play with fire and burn themselves." Wang Lingbao chuckled and said, "Our Deputy General Li also has times when he is nervous. In the past, when you talked about how to use the troops, you were always clear and logical. You wanted to use every single cavalry on the blade. If I didn't interrupt you, you would be able to talk for a few hours without panting." Li Mofen's face was gloomy, but he did not refute. Wang Lingbao leaned over and asked quietly, "Are you worried that you won't be able to stop Tuoba Bodhisattva?" Li Mofen shook his head. Both sides together have about 150,000 soldiers. In such a large battlefield, a martial grandmaster is not that important. Tuoba Bodhisattva has no say in the Beimang Western Front Army. Even if he joins the battle, although he can affect the situation to a certain extent, he cannot truly decide the outcome. Wang Lingbao rolled his eyes and said, "Then what are you worried about? It's not like you don't know what kind of crap the cavalry of Gusai Prefecture's 4 towns are. Unless that old man Lu Gue uses the heavy armored infantry as the central army and sets up a horse-repelling formation to the death, and then places all the cavalry on the 2 wings, using this kind of most inflexible turtle tactic to deal with the Dragon Elephant army, then we won't have any opportunity to bite them." Li Mofen still shook his head. If this Beimang were to use a tactic that any mediocre general would use, then he wouldn't be Lu Gue. Wang Lingbao was also a bit irritated. He suddenly thought of something and asked curiously, "That Liuzhou general surnamed Ko wants us to leave him 5,000 elite troops and not use them no matter what the situation is. What's the deal? Did we really agree?" Li Mofen said helplessly, "In any case, the general has already agreed. Just do as he says." There was a long silence. Wang Lingbao suddenly laughed and said, "Old Li, I didn't think that in the end, not a single one of those civil officials from Qingcang City went to Linyao. Do you think that in this world, only our Bailiang has this kind of situation? But it's not that I, Wang Lingbao, don't have a conscience. Whenever I think of this group of civil officials appearing on the city walls to learn how to draw a bow and shoot an arrow, I really want to laugh." Li Mofen's face also had a hint of a smile. Wang Lingbao subconsciously touched the scar on his face and asked, "Old Li, how many years have we fought side by side?" Li Mofen was taken aback and only replied, "I forgot." Wang Lingbao laughed loudly. "I also forgot." In short, it had been many years. Chapter 1564. Beimang's iron hooves passed by Crouching Bao City and Luanhe City before being stopped outside Yozhou's pass by Xiaoguang City. If they couldn't break through this pass and successfully enter Yozhou's territory, All of Beimang's cavalry troops on the eastern front would be useless. Outside the city, 2 Beimang officers on the eastern front were closely guarded by no less than 1,000 elite soldiers. They were inspecting the situation at the top of the city walls. Commander Yang Yuanzhan sighed emotionally. The ancients really didn't lie to me. Apart from this city, the mouth of the bottle gourd is already in my hands. However, as long as Xiaoguang City is not broken, we will never be able to fight to the death with those 30,000 Yuzhou cavalry troops. Zhong Tan, the vanguard general who had just been conferred the title of Xiajubo by the emperor, laughed. It's really hard on you, great general. It's like you're leading a nest of baby birds, crying piteously for food. It's so noisy every day. The old general laughed. Once we pass through Xiaoguang City, the entire Yuzhou will be under our hooves. At that time, it'll be easy to fight. There will be opportunities and military contributions everywhere. However, how much we can stuff into our pockets will depend on our own abilities. Zhong Tan, who had personally gone up to the city to fight yesterday, was covered in a bloody aura. He said softly, "Now we just have to wait for Yan Wenluan to bring his Yuzhou infantry to fill the gap in Xiaoguang City. Otherwise, Xiaoguang City will fall in 3 days at most." Yang Yuanzhan sneered, "Xiaoguang City is not Huta City. The city is only so big. How many people can stand on the city walls? Yan Wenluan will at most send 6,000 people to Xiaoguang City to participate in the defense. Any more and they'll only be able to squeeze into the city to watch the show, let alone go to the city walls." Yang Yuanzhan looked at Xiaoguang City in the distance, whose defenses were already stretched to the limit. All of the large ballistae had been destroyed, especially after their infantry had almost destroyed Crouching Bao City and Luanhe City. During this period of time, hundreds of catapults had been madly hurling boulders at Xiaoguang City. As a result, during this summer, there was a lot of rain above Xiaoguang City. Apart from the fortresses on the 2 sides of Xiaoguang City and Luanhe City, all of the other strongholds had already been cleaned out by the Beimang cavalry troops who were crazed for military contributions. The beacons at the mouth of the bottle gourd were undoubtedly the first to bear the brunt of the attacks and had long become the best hunting targets. Some of the larger fortresses with slightly more soldiers were also broken through after a few or even a dozen private cavalry troops converged. This had saved Yang Yuanzhan a lot of trouble. Right now, after Crouching Bao City and Luanhe City had been destroyed, the mouth of the bottle gourd was actually very suitable for cavalry to gallop over long distances. It could be said that as long as Yang Yuanzhan's army on the eastern front took Xiaoguang City, not only would Yuzhou be wide open, given the absolute disadvantage of the Yuzhou cavalry, the eastern front of Beimang would be able to attack and retreat all the way to the mouth of the bottle gourd to the north of Xiaoguang City. No matter how outstanding Yan Wenluan's infantry troops were, how could 2-legged infantrymen outrun 4-legged cavalry troops? As a result, even though Zhong Tan's infantry troops suffered astonishing losses, with 2,000 or 3,000 man squads collapsing miserably every day, the old general who was frowning on the surface was actually not too worried. In the depths of his heart, he even secretly rejoiced in the misfortune of his old friend, Lu Gui, who was in charge of the Western Front. Back then, Xi Jing wanted Lu Gui to go to Lu Province, where the Bailiang frontier army did not have any strongholds to rely on, but wanted Yang Yuanzhan to attack Yuzhou, wanting him to lead his troops through the mouth of the bottle gourd, a terrifying region that was said to be capable of burying 150,000 Beimang soldiers. How could Yang Yuanzhan not have any complaints? However, looking back now, fortune and misfortune truly came hand in hand. The will of the heavens was hard to fathom. Out of the corner of his eye, Zhong Tan caught a glimpse of the old general's confident expression. This vanguard general with illustrious military achievements wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. In the end, he swallowed the words back into his stomach and did not voice his conjecture. The reason why he was able to squeeze out Yelu Yuhu and become the new Xia Jubo with less than a year of military service was because of the words of an A-rank tycoon in the imperial court of Xi Jing. Zhong Tan alone has caused the deaths of 50,000 soldiers of our Eastern Front army at the mouth of the bottle gourd. It's no different from having 50,000 more brave infantrymen, who are adept at sieging cities and raiding strongholds. How can I not become Xia Jubo? Logically speaking, as a member of the Zhong family who had leaped to the same level as Xia of the Central Plains and Ko Jianghuai of the Western Frontier and Song Li of the Central Plains should be the most complacent. However, Zhong Tan always felt that the situation in Yuzhou was not so simple. Yang Yuanzhan suddenly pointed at the city wall where the situation had taken a sharp turn for the worse. Instead of being alarmed, he laughed out loud and said, "Zhong Tan, look, Yan Wenwan finally can't sit still. I thought this old man had dug a big hole for us in Yuzhou. Unexpectedly, he only has this little willpower. I'm disappointed, truly disappointed. When Zhong Tan saw the desperate situation at the top of Shaoguang City, he finally felt relieved of a heavy burden. Shaoguang City's geographical location could be said to be blessed by the heavens. It occupied the only pass at the mouth of the bottle gourd that could allow a large-scale cavalry army to pass through. As a result, the battle here could only be fought head-on. It was impossible for either side to launch a surprise attack. Zhong Tan's troops on the eastern front had recently been able to continuously pour into the city wall. Yesterday, Zhong Tan had personally led 800 Deathsworn onto the city wall and fought fiercely for less than an hour before they were chased off the wall. When the main battlefield of a siege changed from being ants clinging to the city wall to a melee battle, it often meant that the city was not far from being breached. Most likely because they knew that Shaoguang City was in imminent danger. This was the first time Yan Wenwan's old battalion had appeared on the battlefield at the mouth of the bottle gourd. Zhong Tan urged his horse forward. Without the threat of the ballistae on the city wall, with Zhong Tan's martial cultivation and armor, he did not fear the arrows of the scattered master archers on the city wall. Zhong Tan raised his head and looked over. Sure enough, a large wave of Yozhou's old battalion infantry had arrived at the top of the city wall. They were wearing the classic swallow armor, which was meticulously crafted by Bailiang's official craftsmen. This kind of swallow armor was composed of 1,500 pieces of refined iron armor leaves, which were then connected with tough leather strips and nails. It weighed more than 60 jin and was not in any way inferior to West Chu's first-rate heavy infantry. Moreover, Bailiang men were naturally superior to West Chu soldiers in physique. The Yen clan's infantry wore heavy armor and held spears in their hands as they stood in formation. During the Spring and Autumn War, they had once caused the West Chu cavalry to be flabbergasted. The birth of heavy infantry in the Great Feng dynasty, and the formation of the Spring and Autumn Nine Kingdoms was originally the result of large-scale cavalry gradually becoming the main characters of the battlefield. This was especially true after the grassland cavalry became increasingly unstoppable. Since the infantry could no longer compare to the cavalry in terms of agility, they might as well completely abandon mobility and use inaction to suppress the enemy. Of course, heavy infantry were originally not a precious soldier type used to defend a city. It was not purely because fighting infantry with infantry was a waste of talent, but because heavy infantry were simply too heavy. It was not wise for them to engage in close combat at the top of the city wall, where every inch of land was worth its weight. However, the 400 Baimang daredevils who had already reached the top of Shaoguang City were practically wiped out by the swallow armor in a single exchange. Zhong Tan turned to a messenger and said in a heavy voice, "Have Zheng Lin lead 2,000 cavalry to support the retreating infantry." On the top of the city wall, life and death were decided immediately. The Baimang infantry were already pretty much exhausted, but one of them still managed to deliver a ferocious blow with his blade. In the end, the well-armored Yen family heavy infantry raised his left arm and casually swung his blade aside. That old battalion Yen family elite continued to charge forward. The cold blade in his right hand instantly pierced through the chest of this leather-armored Baimang barbarian. Relying on the tremendous momentum, he directly knocked this Baimang soldier against the outer wall. After quickly pulling out his blade, he raised it up with both hands, ripping out a bloody gash from the waist to the shoulder of a Baimang barbarian who had been waiting for an opportunity to hack at his face. Scarlet blood splattered all over this heavy infantry soldier's face, making him look especially sinister. A Baimang soldier was knocked out of the city through a crack in the wall. On the top of Shaoguang City, metal armor clanged. One after another, the bloody heads of the Baimang soldiers were tossed down from the top of the city wall by those burly armored soldiers. Apart from the soldiers who had climbed up the city wall, no one was spared. When the Baimang siege soldiers heard the drums of retreat, they hurriedly pulled down their scaling ladders. Above them, heads and corpses constantly fell down, as well as a rain of arrows from the archers who had returned to the top of the city wall. This rain of blood and arrows was Shaoguang City's most powerful answer to the rain curtain created by the Baimang catapults. Shaoguang City, whose gates had been tightly shut all this time, opened for the first time. A large group of heavily armored soldiers charged out. On the top of the city wall, the heavily armored Yuzhou soldiers slid down the scaling ladders and began a one-sided slaughter of the Baimang soldiers who could not retreat in time. Like a flood pouring out of the city, Baimang soldiers constantly drowned in blood. Chapter 1565. When the 2,000 Baimang cavalry closest to the city walls received Zhong Tan's orders, They began to accelerate their charge, launching wave after wave of mounted archery in an attempt to suppress the formation of Xiaoguang City's infantry as much as possible while assisting their own soldiers in their retreat. At the same time, the foot archers on the city walls, which had a longer range than the mounted archers, decisively gave up on killing the Beimang infantry and turned toward the Beimang cavalry that were currently making their way out of the city. The cavalry commander, Zhang Lin, raised his arm and paused. The cavalry no longer advanced and began to slowly retreat 50 paces. The vast majority of the arrows from the city walls landed within these 50 paces. Zhang Lin turned around and surveyed his surroundings, feeling somewhat depressed. Apart from the infantry that were urgently retreating from the flanks of the cavalry, the main culprits that were preventing their cavalry from rushing to the battlefield just so happened to be the infantry formations that were supposed to be in charge of following up on the siege. Otherwise, as long as they had 2,000 cavalry to block the city gates, given the current number of crossbows in Xiaoguang City, they wouldn't be able to pose too much of a threat. Then, even if the 4,000 cavalry couldn't completely stop the infantry from leaving the city, they would at least be able to make it impossible for them to spread out their formation comfortably. Zhang Lin's cavalry could be considered the elites of the Eastern Front. Apart from the fact that they hadn't brought any spears because they hadn't expected to charge into the enemy formation, they had all sorts of mounted bows and foot archers. Lassos, axes, and all sorts of other weapons were also present. They were all clad in uniform chainmail, which was even more extravagant than the leather armor of ordinary grassland cavalry. Zhang Lin's unmoving cavalry seemed like a crane among a flock of chickens amidst the fiercely retreating Beimang infantry. Very soon, several cavalry reinforcements arrived with great difficulty, making their way through the infantry. Altogether, there were about 3,500 cavalry. However, opportunities on the battlefield were always fleeting. Under the skilled assistance of nearly 1,000 auxiliary troops in charge of transporting supplies, the Yuzhou infantry had already calmly formed up outside Xiaoguang City's gates, their numbers as dense as hedgehogs. However, for some reason, this infantry did not place the 3 axes, antler wood, caltrops, or barricades in front of their formation. Zhang Lin couldn't help but find this rather strange. For better or for worse, Xiaoguang City was the last strategic town on the Huluku defensive line. Even if they had never thought of going out of the city to control cavalry by foot, the city should still have these common military items stored up. Zhang Lin chuckled. It was better that there weren't any. Those large barricades with 4 slanted logs and holes for metal spears, as well as those simple barricades that the strategist had explained countless times, truly made a cavalry commander like Zhang Lin feel his scalp go numb just from hearing about them. Zhang Lin carefully observed the division of troops among the Yuzhou infantry. Sure enough, it was just as those scholarly strategists had said. The sturdy shield men with the strongest physical strength raised large shields almost as tall as a person at the front, while the sharp spears in the back thrust out from the shields. Above the rattan walls, there were many rows of spears that made the cavalry feel a chill even in the middle of summer. Behind them were the axemen who gave up on cold blades and wielded large axes. Behind them were the archers who could draw their bows and kill the enemy before the cavalry, as well as the waist crossbows and rear crossbows, which had a longer range than the infantry bows. Zhang Lin subconsciously raised his butt off the back of his horse, trying to get a clearer look. However, it was very difficult for him to discover any more of the profundities of the Yen clan's old battalion. 1,000-man commander who had come from the grasslands of Biting to the Huluku asked with a smile, "General Zheng, what do you say? Why don't you let me lead the troops in a charge first? It's not a bad idea to test the waters." Zhang Lin looked at this young 1,000-man commander. He was the eldest son of a certain clan that occupied a large area of fertile grasslands in the north. He was young and full of vigor. Previously, he had accomplished quite a number of military exploits in the beacon fort around Luanhe City. Now, he was just waiting to break through Xiaoguang City and go on a killing spree in Yuzhou. It was said that this kid had already discussed with a group of biting nobles of similar background. When they entered Yuzhou, they would ignore everything else and work together to set their sights on that place called Yanji County. The women there were so beautiful that even the men of the central plains of Liang would drool over them. When the time came, they would pick out a few hundred of the most beautiful women to enjoy alone, while the other women of Yanji County would be sold to the nobles of the grasslands. Not only would they earn money, but they would also earn favors. Zhang Lin, as the son of a noble clan of the southern dynasty, did not have a good impression of these nobles of Biting. Over the past 20 years, there had been countless examples of minor nobles of Biting abusing their power in western capital of the southern dynasty. However, Zhang Lin still shook his head and said, That 4,000 infantry is the old battalion of Yan Wenluan of Yuzhou. They are the direct descendants of the direct line of descent. We shouldn't rashly charge into their formation. General Zhong only asked me to cover their retreat. We can't be greedy and advance prematurely. That 1,000-man commander chuckled and said, "Whether or not I'm advancing prematurely will have to wait until I lose the battle. Every one of the 1,000 men under my command is an elite cavalry that can drill into the belly of a horse like playing with a toy. General Zhang, since you don't dare to charge into the formation, you can just wait on the side and watch me provide support." Zhang Lin said expressionlessly, "Oh, then this general will quietly wait for the report of victory." The young 1,000-man commander laughed out loud and took the lead to rush into the heavily guarded phalanx of infantry. 1,000 cavalrymen were divided into 2 rows of 200 cavalrymen. There was a large gap between the 5 rows. The first 2 rows were mainly composed of short and tall, heavy cavalrymen. Everyone was holding their original spears or iron spears seized from Bailiang's Fort Wu. Their armor was also better than that of the last 3 rows. Thus, they quickly advanced forward. This kind of cavalry charging formation that the grassland people were very familiar with. The formation was simple but flexible. At the end of the Dafeng dynasty, they had achieved great results against the Central Plains infantry, causing the Central Plains to be filled with smoke. Every time they were about to clash with the Central Plains infantry, the last 3 rows of light cavalrymen would suddenly speed up and charge out from the gaps between the iron cavalry. They would either shoot out a dense rain of arrows or throw out short spears. If the enemy's phalanx of infantry could maintain a stable formation, then the heavy cavalrymen would not rush into the formation. Instead, they would make an arc and slide out from the 2 wings of the phalanx. If they could not find an opportunity on the 2 sides of the phalanx of infantry, then they would return to their original spot and repeat until a hole appeared in the phalanx of infantry. Then, the iron cavalry would launch a truly lethal charge and create a gap for the light cavalry behind. In the past, the grassland cavalry that galloped freely on the territory of the Dafeng dynasty had greatly improved both their armor and weapons due to the various benefits that Hong Jia brought to the north. Unfortunately, the enemy this 1,000-man cavalry was facing was the heavy armored infantry of Yan Wenluan, the Bailiang frontier army. It was not the embroidered pillow dynasty that was boasted by some rich and powerful people that all the dynasties died because they were weak, only the Dafeng dynasty died because they were strong. When they realized that there were only 1,000 cavalry charging alone, this infantry square formation made a shocking move, going against the common sense of the art of war and putting down the shield wall and spear forest that were the essence of the horse-repelling formation. It was only between 300 and 100 steps. Under the sharp arrows of the large number of crossbows, the 1,000 cavalry that were shouting were thrown off their horses. A total of 600 of them lay down. What happened next was also completely different from what was written in the military books. The infantry formation didn't continue to fire arrows at a large scale. Instead, they shot down the dozens of mounted soldiers who tried to escape from the battlefield. The front line readied their shields and spears. It was like saying, "Cavalry charging formation? Then please come." After realizing that their 1,000-man commander had an arrow pierced through his chest, the remaining 300 Baimang cavalry charged over without caring about their lives. They charged towards those sharp horse-repelling spears. After one charge, the entire infantry square formation was still as stable as a rock. In front of the shield, in the spear, the 300 Baimang warhorses, without exception, were all pierced through by the 2.5-foot-long spears. On the walls of Shaoguang City, a short one-eyed old man was accompanied by Yuzhou General Huang Fuqiong and Provincial Governor Hu Kuei, the 2 Bailiang border officials. From start to finish, the old man did not even glance at the 1,000 Baimang cavalry seeking their own death. Instead, he looked even further north, outside the gorge. He muttered to himself, "In 3 days, the 4 cavalry armies will be able to enter the gorge, right?" Outside the mouth of the calabash, the 20,000 Yuzhou cavalrymen were divided into 2. Commanding Cavalry General Shi Yulu and Agile Cavalry General Fan Wenyao each led 2,000 cavalrymen and continued north. They were in charge of destroying the grain transportation of Longyao province and intercepting those wandering cavalrymen. The Deputy General of the Yuzhou Cavalry, Yul Wandao, personally led 16,000 cavalry to welcome the arrival of the 2 cavalry armies. When the time came, the Yuzhou cavalry would act as guards for the latter. Even though the 2 cavalry armies added together only amounted to more than half of the Yuzhou cavalry. But Yul Wandao was not angry at all. 2 days later, a group of 10,000 cavalry broke away from the main army and charged into the gorge. There were dilapidated fortresses and unmanned beacons. It was a scene of devastation. A gust of wind blew past the city of Crouching Bow City. These 10,000 cavalry did not stop at Crouching Bow City. When they circled around the city, all the cavalry took out their Baelyong blades and raised them high up. The Great Snow Dragon Cavalry. They silently headed south. Chapter 1566. In the darkness of the night, a group of carriages quietly entered Liangzhou City and passed through the tightly guarded city gates without any obstructions. Mount Qingliang opened its E-gate, and the northern Liang Prince's mansion opened its doors to welcome guests in a manner that was normally reserved for the emperor. There were 3 carriages. The white-robed monk's family of 3 and the little monk Nanbei sat in the first carriage. Master White Lotus of Mount Longhu, Bai Yu, and Han Guiqing of Mount Qingshan Monastery of Mount Wudong sat in the second carriage. Chong Sui, Su Huang, and the others from Shangyin Academy sat in the last carriage. Su Weisheng led a large group of people out of Mount Qingliang to welcome the guests. Behind Song Dongming, the deputy administrator of Baelyong, stood a group of curious advisors. Song Dongming's official residence halfway up the mountain was known as the Dragon Gate of Baelyong. Su Fengnian's residence in Wutong'an was known as the Phoenix Pavilion. It was clear that Song Dongming had an extraordinary position in Baelyong's officialdom. Only Li Dongbei and the little monk Nanbei could be counted as revisiting old haunts. Li Dongbei's eyes were sharp. She immediately spotted Song Yu, the chief steward of the prince's residence. She trotted over and greeted him warmly. Song Yu, who had been the steward of the Su family for most of his life, was also very happy to see this little girl. This rigid old man, who was privately called the cold-faced Yama by the officials of Liangzhou, actually squeezed out a smile for the first time. Probably because he was not used to greeting people with a smile, his face was slightly stiff. However, the old man still smiled and said that he would personally accompany Miss Li to the cosmetic store tomorrow. The little girl was very happy. Lu Chengyan and Wang Chudong did not show their faces in public. After all, the 2 girls were future princesses. It was not proper for them to go out and greet guests. Su Weisheng greeted the white-robed monk and Master White Lotus first, then walked to Chong Sui and the others. Chong Sui raised his empty wine gourd and shook it. He smiled and said, "Green ant wine, no more and no less. 1 pot a day. Junior sister, you have a big family business. This shouldn't be a problem, right?" Su Weisheng nodded and said, "Drinking is not a problem. Just don't go to Tide Hark Lake to drink in the middle of the night. If you fall into the water, you will be fed to the fish." Jean Baogu's eyes were red as she called out to her senior sister. Su Weisheng smiled gently and said, "It's only been a few years since we last met and you've already grown up. Do you want me to be your matchmaker?" Although the men of Baelyong are used to drinking the northwest wind and eating the yellow sand of the desert, and are not as well read as the scholars of the Central Plains, after interacting with them for a long time, you will know that they are more capable of shouldering burdens than the scholars of the Central Plains. Especially the men over there. They ride the best horses, carry the best sabers, drink the strongest wine, and kill the Baymang barbarians. I'm sure Junior Marshall's sister will like them. Jean Bauscher grabbed Su Weisheng's hand and held it in her arms. She smiled coquettishly and said, "Senior sister, you're not married yet. Why should I be in a hurry?" Su Weisheng turned to greet Su Huang, Sima Kan, and Lu Duanmao. She did not say anything extra and just called them Senior Marshal Brother and Junior Marshal Brother. The white-robed monk stood next to his wife and watched as Bai Yu and Song Dongming hit it off at first sight. One was a Taoist immortal who was highly regarded by the late emperor. The other was a scholar who had a high chance of becoming an important official in the imperial court. These 2 were among the few scholars in the entire Liang dynasty. They chatted happily. But when Li Dongxin recalled the secret conversation about Leader Zhao on Mount Wudong, the white-robed monk felt a little tired. He sighed softly and no longer paid attention to Bai Yu and Song Dongming's conversation. After entering the palace, he looked around at the scenery. In the early years of the Liang dynasty, there was a saying, "Millions of families have suffered, but one family has become rich." In other words, the Su family, who occupied a mountain and sat on Tide Listening Lake, wantonly collected the wealth of the people in Baelyong. Their wealth was comparable to that of a country. Soon, the aides of the Dragon Gate lined up to Li Dongxin. Probably because the deputy administrator had warned them beforehand, These Bailiang officials who had admired the white-robed monk for a long time did not dare to open their mouths and talk about their daily lives. They all respectfully introduced themselves and at most added a few compliments. The white-robed monk smiled and nodded in return. The latter did not think that the abbot of the two Zen temples was putting on airs. Everyone knew that when the white-robed monk returned to Tian City after traveling thousands of miles to the west, he only put his palms together and saluted the emperor who personally led the horse for him. He did not even turn over and dismount from the horse. This group of officials who had leaped over the northern Liang Dragon Gate had already achieved a certain level of attainment in the official field. Hence they did not want to give the Wudong Mountain's great Zhenren Han Gui the cold shoulder. Very sincerely, they asked for advice on the Taoist school's health maintenance technique. Forget about other things, Han Gui, who had the highest chance of becoming the next Wudong sect leader, could not be considered cold shoulder anymore. In the future, he would be a minister of the same rank as the Six Ministries minister. Who would dare to slight him? In addition to the white-robed monk and his wife who led the chief butler Song Yu to a house to stay, the East and West girls and the North and South monks had already left the group and wandered around with familiarity. Along the way, she could accurately call out the names of the maids she met. She also had an elder sister. The clever maids of Mount Qingliang certainly remembered this little girl clearly. She was someone who was doted on by His Royal Highness as his own sister. The little girl had a good temper, so it was hard not to like her. Bai Yu and Chang Sui followed Su Weisheng and Song Dongming to the unique official residence halfway up the mountain. Although it was called the Deputy Administrator's residence, it was actually a continuous series of short courtyards. A deputy administrator and more than 30 assistant officials dealt with government affairs and basic necessities of life here. Those Dragon Gate officials, who were like the male servants of the Liang Imperial Court, sensibly dispersed and went back to their own homes. They continued to deal with the affairs gathered from the governor's mansions of the three provinces of Bailiang. In the last room, except for Su Weisheng, who was in a wheelchair, Song Dongming, who was an important minister of the border area and had to be admitted by the Liang Imperial Court, Bai Yu and Chang Sui, who were temporarily in Mount Qingliang as the top guests of the prince's mansion, Su Huang, who was a master of the art of war who was about to go to Huayang Pass, Sima Kan, who was already the governor of Taiyu County in Lingzhou, Lu Duanmao, who was about to enter the governor's mansion of Lingzhou as an assistant to Su Beiji, and Jin Bao Shi, who wanted to enter Wutong'an, all sat down. Chapter 1567. Su Weisheng went straight to the point. Just as Mr. White Lotus predicted, the situation on the Western Front is extremely unfavorable to our Bailiang. His Highness has already personally headed to Liuzhou. According to the latest reports from our spies during the day, all the cavalry stationed in Liangzhou have received the order and are moving out urgently. However, apart from the 2 units of 6,000 cavalry that were originally stationed in the western part of Liangzhou, they only need to wait where they are and do not need to travel long distances. Apart from the 1,000 Horned Eagle cavalry led by Luo Hongkai who was near Mount Wudong, and the 2 captains who passed by later, a total of 2,300 cavalry, the fastest unit of Liangzhou cavalry will arrive at the border between Liangzhou and Liuzhou 1 day after His Highness. The slowest will take 4 days. And this is under the premise that they completely disregard the horse's stamina. Because the Tianjing horse farm in Bailiang is only second to the Xianli horse farm in scale, and it just so happens that it is not far from where His Highness is located, they are able to transfer 600 A-grade warhorses and 4,000 B-grade warhorses. This is probably the only good news we have. Su Weisheng paused for a moment, then said with a grave expression, "To tell you the truth, Wang Sui has already led 50,000 cavalry to easily take down Ji Bei and Heng Shui. This elite cavalry that is confronting the Liangyang Liao is currently heading for the eastern gate of Yuzhou. Their goal is to cooperate with Yang Yuanzhan's army in the gourd mouth, attempting to destroy half of Yuzhou in one go." Su Huang slowly asked, "Even if Great General Yan Wenluan's Yuzhou infantry were to send a unit north to reinforce Shaoguang City, given that Yuzhou already has 30,000 cavalry, it wouldn't be too difficult for them to simultaneously defend the last line of defense at the gourd mouth and the eastern border, right?" Su Weisheng smiled bitterly. "It was originally like this, but we encountered 2 whimsical leaders. Under their insistence, not only were the 30,000 Yuzhou cavalry sent north from River Province to the gourd mouth, even the 10,000 Great Snow Dragon cavalry and 2 heavy cavalry units left their garrisons and rushed to the gourd mouth. As a result, not only is Liangzhou's Huta city in a critical situation, the rear areas of Huayang Pass and Liuya Fuling are practically empty. In addition, the cavalry in Liang Province is rushing to Lu Province to put out the fire. Once Huta city falls, Liang Province will be in an unimaginable and terrifying situation. The two deputy commanders of cavalry, He Zhonghu and Zhou Kong, as well as the deputy commander of infantry, Great Ancestor Gu, do not have enough soldiers to support the situation of Huta City being lost. Therefore, the other deputy commander of infantry, Chan Yunchue, has already led 30,000 elite infantry to Liangzhou. Su Huang's expression changed slightly as he began to quickly calculate the gains and losses in his mind. Chong Sui's wine gourd was already filled to the brim with green ant wine. Song Dongming sat upright, while Bai Yu narrowed his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. Su Weisheng sternly said, "Right now, we can only hope that Lu Province will not lose and that Huaiyang Pass cannot be lost. This way, Beiliang will be able to smoothly engage in an encirclement and annihilation of an unprecedented scale. Otherwise, even if Huaiyang Pass falls, let alone Huaiyang Pass, we won't be able to endure a one-for-one trade between Beiliang's Lu Province and Beimang's Gourd Pass. In the end, Beiliang is only using the strength of one land to fight against the strength of one country. Beimang can afford a war of attrition, but we can't." Su Huang softly said, "In this case, whether or not Your Highness's reinforcements from Liang Province can change the situation in Lu Province is of utmost importance. Whether or not Protector General Chu can protect Huta City and Huaiyang Pass Liuya Fuling as the first line of defense on Beiliang's border is of utmost importance. Whether or not Commander Yuan and the Yuzhou cavalry can block and finish off the army of more than 200,000 soldiers in the Gourd Pass is of utmost importance." Su Huang repeated the three words of utmost importance. This meant that if Beiliang wanted to win this shocking gamble, they had to do it step by step. There could not be any major mistakes in each step, otherwise they would lose everything. Chong Sui wiped away the wine at the corner of his mouth, asking with a smile, "Then I'll only ask about the battlefield that Beiliang has the most confidence in." At the Gourd Pass, Yuan Zuozong's Great Snow Dragon Cavalry, those two heavy cavalry that have disappeared for 20 years, and the Yuzhou cavalry of Tianheng and Yulwan Dao. Just how confident are they that they can capture that old turtle Yang Yuanzan? Su Weisheng smiled and extended a hand. Chong Sui rubbed his chin, saying regretfully, "Only 50%, then it's difficult. I have to think of a way out for myself. Otherwise, before this chair under my butt of Mount Qingliang has even warmed up, I might be able to hear the hoofbeats of the Beimang barbarians." Su Weisheng once again slowly flipped his palm. The corners of Bai Yu's lips curled up. Chong Sui stared. "Junior sister Su, are you playing with me?" Su Weisheng smiled. Although the number of soldiers blocking the Gourd Pass is not many, for better or for worse, it's almost half of what my father has accumulated for most of his life. If they still can't win, then where does Beiliang's confidence come from to confront Beimang's million-strong army? Chong Sui suddenly laughed. "Why don't I go to Shaoguang City in Yuzhou right now, and junior sister let me command a heavy cavalry?" Su Weisheng laughed coldly. "Senior brother, if you can stop drinking, then I'll agree." Chong Sui said resentfully, "Then forget it." Su Huang suddenly frowned. "I heard that Beimang has also spared no effort in building two heavy cavalry units named after the two surnames of Yelu and Murong." Su Weisheng said softly, "It has nothing to do with the Gourd Pass. We just received a report from a spy at the border that one of them has already rushed to the Liuzhou border. This is where Lu Gui's confidence in wiping out the 30,000 dragon elephant cavalry lies." The entire room sunk into silence. Bai Yu, who had not interjected all this time, shook his head with a bitter smile. Jean Bauscher was stunned for a moment. He couldn't help but ask, even if the cavalry reinforcements from Liangzhou can arrive in time, will they still be of any use? Su Weisheng said helplessly, "If it were up to me, I'd just do my best and leave the rest to fate." Everyone in the room fell silent once more. For some reason, Su Weisheng smiled happily without any trace of dejection. However, if it were a certain fellow, he definitely wouldn't think this way. He would only say, "Losing is better than admitting defeat. Whether it's okay or not, let's talk after the fight." Liangzhou's Tiger Head City, inside the Gourd Pass, outside Qingsong City, Liuzhou's eastern border. Beiliang was fighting on all four fronts. Chapter 1568. Actually, this chapter is only one of the 3 chapters one originally planned to write. The other 2 chapters are about the movements in Liao Province and the Battle of Liuzhou. However, I definitely can't finish it today. I'm only halfway through the 2nd chapter. In order to keep updating, I have to upload it first. In the western capital of the Southern Dynasty, there was a mansion of a wealthy family whose threshold was so high that a child had to climb over it. The gate was as busy as a marketplace, and carriages and horses were like dragons. The guests were all here to congratulate the old master of this house for becoming a centenarian. In the entire western capital, there were only a few people who had lived to this age, and there was no one else who had such a good reputation as the old master. Even the big shots in the western capital who had lived to the age of 70 didn't know the real name of this centenarian. They all called him Old Wang, and the younger ones could only call him Old Master Wang. The Wang family was one of the big families of the Southern Dynasty. Although the descendants of the Wang family who were 2 generations younger than Old Master Wang didn't amount to much, and they only had 1 assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights and 2 military town captains, and 2 of them were dead now, but fortunately, Old Master Wang's great-grandson was very capable. He climbed all the way from the bottom of the Baimang army, and became one of the 4 Jinzhou of the king's tent with real military achievements. Now that he married a noble from Longguan, the entire family's trend could be said to be thriving day by day. Today's birthday celebration wasn't harmonious from the beginning to the end. As the local tyrant of Baimang's southern dynasty, the Longguan noble family's internal affairs were complicated. There were marriages and feuds. Some people didn't get along with the Wang family, a big family from the Jia family who became in-laws with the Wang family. Today was Old Master Wang's 100th birthday, and he was also implicated. Someone openly sent a piece of calligraphy that only had the 4 words, "Live a long life." Even the guests who came to visit couldn't stand this kind of unscrupulous slap in the face. However, Old Master Wang actually took the calligraphy with a smile, and didn't forget to ask the housekeeper to give the servant who sent the calligraphy a piece of silver for the celebration. After all, Old Master Wang was a centenarian and couldn't entertain guests for too long. After greeting some important ministers and family friends of the western capital, he handed the task to his nephew, who had been the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights for 16 years to entertain the guests. The old man returned to the quiet courtyard to rest. The courtyard wasn't small, and there were dozens of extremely rare plum trees. Old Master Wang called himself Wild Plum Forest Elder. In this noisy dusk, Old Master Wang asked the servants in the courtyard to move a rattan chair under the plum tree. With the careful support of a pretty maid, he lay down on the chair that was cushioned with a soft Sichuan brocade. The maid didn't dare to leave. She sat on a small bench according to the old rules. She respected this unimaginably good-tempered old man very much. Since she entered the courtyard as a maid, she had never seen Old Master Wang angry. She clearly remembered that when she first came to the courtyard, one day she was sitting in the inner room and watching Old Master Wang take an afternoon nap. Someone outside the room accidentally broke a teacup, and the old man, who was a light sleeper, immediately woke up. She was scared to death. She didn't expect Old Master Wang to just smile and wave his hand at her after waking up, indicating that she should pretend that she didn't know anything. Later, she heard that someone in the courtyard had neglected their duty in the early years. One winter, several plum trees froze to death in the plum forest. The entire Wang family was furious and wanted to use the family law. 100 lashes, and the person's life was naturally gone. It was Old Master Wang who spoke. He said that there were many valuable things in the world, but there was nothing more valuable than a person's life. If the trees were gone, then they were gone. It didn't matter. In any case, he wouldn't be able to see the new plum trees turn old in this lifetime. It was good to see the withered plum trees. The old man lay quietly on the chair and looked at the plum trees that were not luxuriant. He slowly said, "Little girl Chamie, summer is almost over. In my hometown, there is a period of time called the plum rain season. Because when it rains, it is when the plum trees in Jiangnan are yellow, so it is called plum rain. It is a very nice way of saying it, isn't it? If you aren't a scholar, you won't be able to think of such a name. When I was young, I often recited some proverbs that I heard from my elders. I didn't understand the reason, but it was easy to say. When the peach blossom water is exhausted, it must be the yellow plum tree in drought. When the rain hits the yellow plum tree's head, there will be no sun for 45 days. Now that I recite it, I feel that it is easy to say." The maid asked curiously in a soft voice, "Old master, why do you like plum trees so much?" The old man, who was too lazy to chat with others, took a deep breath and said with a smile, "In my hometown, there are all kinds of things to pay attention to. Some are interesting, some are boring. Not only are people divided into different classes, even the flowers are no exception. For example, crazy catkins, frivolous peach blossoms, and this plum blossom's strength of character. The maid, who had been poor since childhood and was not very literate, whispered, "Strength of character?" Old Master Wang smiled and said, "When a scholar writes poetry, his words are correct and he is in high spirits. That is why he is known as having strength of character." Then the strength of character of a scholar is probably what sage Zhang of the Confucian school said. If you are poor, you should take care of yourself. If you are rich, you should help the world. This is very difficult. I just want to do it well, but I can't. However, there is one thing that I can do better than many people. Some people don't have a backbone, so they can't bear to see others have strength of character. Not only do they not feel ashamed of their inferiority, but they also spit and even make trouble for others. As for me, at the very least I still have the mind to emulate others. The little maid scratched her head quietly. She was in a daze and didn't quite understand. Probably tired from talking, the old man began to close his eyes and rest. At this moment, the sound of footsteps came from the courtyard. The maidservant hurriedly turned her head to look and was stunned. Not only was Master Wang, who had been the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites but had never been able to become the head of the Wang family, but when he entered the courtyard, he had been smiling slightly with his back bent. He was half a step behind the two unfamiliar men. When the maidservant raised her eyes to look, she couldn't move her eyes away. This was because the youngest girl among the three was simply too beautiful. When the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites, Wang Xianling, approached the rattan chair, he slightly quickened his pace and whispered to the old man who seemed to be asleep, "The crown prince is here." The old man opened his eyes and was just about to get up with the help of Wang Xianling and the maid, Chai Mi, when the tall man in the prime of his life hurriedly said with a smile, "Old Master Wang, you don't have to be so polite. Just lie down." Yelu Hongkai came empty-handed this time. He was in the wrong and rude. It is fortunate that old master doesn't blame him. Although the trembling assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites had already received a signal from the Crown Prince of Beimang, he still couldn't dissuade the old man's insistence. After the latter stood up, he very laboriously but respectfully bowed. The Crown Prince, who was secretly visiting the Wang family mansion, said helplessly, "Old master, you are making Yelu Hongkai feel ashamed. Sit, quickly sit." The old man tried his best to sit upright on the rattan chair. Wang Xianling and the maid in the small courtyard each brought over a yellow rosewood chair. When the assistant minister saw that the beautiful woman actually sat down almost at the same time as the Crown Prince, his eyelids suddenly twitched. The Crown Prince of Beimang, who had rushed back to the west capital from the battlefield of Huta City, said pleasantly, "Old master, you are famous for your essays. You are a pure gentleman that even His Majesty praises endlessly. This time, I suddenly heard that it was your 100th birthday and hurried over. At the moment, I couldn't come up with a suitable birthday gift, so I had to come empty-handed. I will definitely make up for it later. I hope old master will be magnanimous enough to forgive me." The old man laughed heartily and said, "This old man is honored by your highness, honored by this old man." Chapter 1569. Wang Xianling heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that the old master, who had become less talkative over the years, was in a good mood and did not become muddle-headed. He thought that it was true that having an old man in the family was like having a treasure. Judging from the situation, he could only stand now. Was there a chance for him to sit on the minister's seat? Even though Yelu Hongkai wasn't well received by those grassland great generals in Northern Mang royal court, not many of Northern Mang's most authoritative great generals and edicts clearly expressing their support for him, in the end, this person was still the rightful first in line to the throne. Among the Southern Dynasty remnant people who attached the most importance to orthodoxy, there were still quite a few nobles who thought highly of Yelu Hongkai. In the past, the two previous great kings of the Northern and Southern dynasties, Huang Songpu and Su Huainan, were actually extremely close to this crown prince who had a gentle nature. However, following Su Huainan's sudden death and Huang Songpu's resignation, as well as the rise of Dong Zhuo, Hong Jingyan, Zhong Tan, this group of robust young generals, Yelu Hongkai became more and more low-key. Wang Xianling, who was standing quietly on the side and holding his breath, was certainly not stupid. The reason why the crown prince came quietly this time was partly because of Wang Jingchong's identity as Dong Jubo, and partly because his old master had a prestige that could not be underestimated among the survivors of the Southern dynasty. This was especially the case after the Wang clan and the A Great clan were connected through marriage. This was equivalent to touching the true core of the Southern dynasty, unlike those ordinary B Great clans who appeared to be well off on the surface and had people serving as assistant ministers and generals. But in reality, they were just a bunch of parasites attached to the Longguan clan. For a moment, Wang Xianling had mixed feelings. The land under his feet, the Merlin courtyard, the Wang family's mansion, the entire western capital, and even the entire southern dynasty were all specially opened up by the vigorous old lady Murong for Hongjia and the survivors of the spring and autumn period. Except for the bloody massacre that happened inexplicably years ago, where many peach trees that were moved from the central plains to the southern dynasty were cut down, which made people tremble in fear, Empress Murong could be said to be quite protective of the survivors of the southern dynasty. Some big families of the Norland went south to pick a fight, and afterwards, they would be punished by the Yellow King. Perhaps it was not too heavy, but it definitely could not be said that it was not painful or itchy. It was just like the Wang family that Wang Xianling belonged to. Although it was not a big family in the Central Plains, it was still a member of the Hanlin Academy for 10 generations. However, it was still in exile thousands of miles away from its hometown. It was even worse than a homeless dog rolling in the mud for food. How could it have imagined that it would return to being a court official in the Southern Dynasty wearing a yellow and purple court robe? Yelu Hongcai's face suddenly turned gloomy. He said in a low voice, "Old master, I also heard about the calligraphy just now. The second family of Longguan is really unreasonable. When I return to the Grassland King's tent, I will definitely talk to His Majesty about this in person. There is no reason for old master to be wronged like this." The old man smiled and waved his hand gently. It's okay. Not to mention the meaning of this calligraphy. Just the words alone can be said to be worth 1,000 gold in our southern dynasty. Although there is no signature, it is obviously written by Yu Liang, one of the 4 calligraphy masters in the world today. I still have a good eyesight. It is indeed worthy of the title. The strokes are like dragon claws that appear in the clouds and are full of the aura of gold and stone. If it was not that soldier advisor who was admired by the literary circle of Liang, no one could have written such an artistic conception. Besides, it is not easy for me to live to this age, so it is time for me to take advantage of my seniority. Naturally, many things can be treated as a child's babble and dismissed with a laugh. Just a laugh. There are many ancient poems and books that say, a person's life is less than 100 years. This but is really accurate. Even if I can't get over it, what does it matter? So, Your Highness, don't worry about this matter. It is better to use it as a topic of conversation after a meal than to get angry. Hearing the old man's words, the arrogant woman also seemed a little surprised. For the first time, she looked at the old master of the Wang family seriously. Yelu Hongcai laughed heartily. The god of longevity is the most important. I will listen to old master. While the old man smiled, he quietly glanced at Wang Xianling. The latter was an old man in his 60s, but in front of the old master, he was still like a child who made a mistake. He immediately panicked and said, "It's not that I am talkative," Yelu Hongcai helped to explain. "Old master, it has nothing to do with Assistant Minister Wang. I heard it myself." The old man smiled. "In this courtyard, Your Highness is the most important. I will listen to Your Highness." Yelu Hongcai smiled knowingly. It seemed like a simple joke, but it made the Crown Prince swallow back many of the drafts he had prepared. Since the fire was strong enough, adding more firewood would be as bad as falling short. He chatted with the old man about poetry, calligraphy, and painting, but didn't mention anything about military affairs. Yelu Hongcai saw that the old master was unable to hide his fatigue, so he got up to leave. Of course, he wouldn't let the old man get up to see him off. Assistant Minister Wang, who had been watching the minister for many years, accompanied him out of the courtyard. The maid named Chimey secretly patted her chest. So it was the Crown Prince who came in person. She really couldn't tell. He didn't put on any airs at all. The old master of the Wang family, who had returned to his rattan chair, closed his eyes and leisurely patted the chair's armrest with one hand. Chimey tiptoed to fetch a round fan and gently fanned it for the old master. As the breeze caressed his face, the summer heat, which wasn't heavy to begin with, became even lighter. A smile appeared on the old man's face as he muttered to himself, calmly sitting in the mountains and seas, pinching the world for 1,000 years. The maid didn't dare to speak. She only sincerely hoped that this century-old man could live another 100 years. The old man fell silent. After some time he said, "Chimey, if your hand is tired, don't fan." The maid smiled and said, "Old master, don't worry. This servant can still fan for a while." The old master of the Wang family said softly, Since I'm in good spirits today, I'll talk to my daughter more. The maid asked cautiously, Old master, aren't you tired? The old man smiled and said, I still don't feel tired. The maid secretly glanced at the entrance of the courtyard. Then old master, please speak. This servant is listening. The old man slowly said, Little girl, let me tell you. In the future, it's best not to marry a scholar, especially one with talent. If he's too talented, it's easy for him to use it on many women. His mind is the most erratic, and he can't stop on one woman. This year, he'll be whispering sweet nothings to each other. Maybe next year, he'll be with another woman. If you want to marry an honest man, it's not that there aren't honest scholars. There are, but there are too few. Take me, this old man, for example. When I was young, I was such a heartless scholar. By the time I truly calm down, it'll be too late. The young girl stopped fanning and covered her mouth to hide her laughter. The old man smiled and said, You don't believe me? If you don't listen to your elders, you'll suffer. The young girl hurriedly said, I believe. The old man joked, You answered so quickly. It's obvious that you didn't take it seriously. Little girl, you still don't believe. The young girl wrinkled her little face. The old man shook his wrist. Go back to your room and rest. Let this old man be alone for a while. You can come back in 2 hours. The young girl grunted and took a small stool to sit under the eaves. It was neither too far nor too close. She couldn't hear the old man's words, but she could clearly see the plum tree and the rattan chair. In fact, the old man wasn't talking to himself. He just looked a little sad. In the blink of an eye, his old country was gone. In the blink of an eye, his teacher and close friends had passed away. In the blink of an eye, he had been in a foreign country for 20 years. In the blink of an eye, he was 100 years old. Then the young girl was shocked to see a scene. The old man tried to stand up as if he knew that she was going to help. The old man didn't turn his head and waved his hand at her. The old man stood up with difficulty and looked up at the branches and leaves of the plum tree in a daze. The old man smiled. Mr. Lee. Mr. Nayland. I, Wong Du, haven't lost the strength of the scholars of the Central Plains. Chapter 1570. Watching the fire from the other side became playing with fire. This was the best description of the defense line at Liang North Pass. As the gateway to Ji Bay, Silver Sparrow Hawk and Horizontal Water both fell at the same time. Bai Mang's 50,000 cavalry pointed at the south, causing everyone in Jizhou to feel threatened. For a moment, the imperial court in the capital was bustling. Some people suggested that the left assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Su Gong, should take over the position left by Tang Taihuang and assist Gu Jiantang in handling the military affairs in the north. Others suggested that Jiaodong's Prince Zhao Sui, who was in charge of Liaoxi, should reinforce Liaoxi and force the 50,000 cavalry to return to the east to prevent the situation in Jizhou from deteriorating completely. There were also people who accused Jizhou's General Yuan Tingshan of not managing the situation properly, causing the flames of war to spread in Ji Bay. He could not take up the heavy responsibility and should let the Deputy General Han Feng take charge of the military affairs in Jizhou. When the west line of Guangling Road was deployed by Xie Shi, not only did they successfully stop the 100,000 southern border troops that had already crossed the river, they even sent a group of soldiers to attack a dangerous pass on the south bank of Guangling River, causing the southern border troops to have no place to advance or retreat. Under the pressure of West Chu's navy, the southern border infantry and Qingzhou navy almost shrunk into a ball and retreated. Under such an urgent situation, the civil and military officials of Great Peace City became more and more worried. They finally could not stand the two Liao border troops not moving. The Bai Mang barbarians were attacking the northwest with all their might. Gu Jiantang did not move at all. However, even the east line of Bai Mang that he was keeping an eye on ran to Jizhou. Obviously, they wanted to bypass the two Liao border defense lines that cost half the country's taxes to build. They wanted to use Jizhou, which was empty due to the absence of Jinan's old soldiers, as a breakthrough point for the south to enter the Central Plains. How could General Gu not do anything? Are you not afraid that Bai Mang's 50,000 cavalry will attack the west of Jingji? Although you, Gu Jiantang, are the only remaining pillar of the dynasty, your heart is really too big, isn't it? There was a town called Taiping near the border of Jizhou in Liaodong. Most of the residents in the town were from the border army, and some of them were officials who were exiled by the imperial court. Occasionally, there would be traveling merchants passing through the town, and they would do some small business on the way. In the past 4 to 5 years, the cheap and good green ant wine was in high demand here. Unfortunately, after Gu Jiantang left his post as the Minister of War, he held the title of Pillar of the country and served as the governor of the two Liao provinces. The border army knew that General Gu did not get along with the Beimang, so the green ant wine produced in Beimang was not sold by many merchants these years. Although Taiping town was small, it had all the essentials. There were 3 to 4 restaurants, and even a proper brothel. There were even more private prostitutes in the small kills. The generals of the border army also turned a blind eye to this. It was better to let it go than to block it. The Liaodong border army was known as the stabilizing force of the Liang dynasty. They were all young and strong men. However, they had been in a stalemate with the Beimang barbarians for many years. They had always lived in peace and rarely fought with each other. How could the soldiers of the border army vent their anger? Could they find other men for other men? Therefore, small towns like Taiping town sprung up like bamboo shoots after a spring rain. Some of the generals of the border army who had a lot of connections had the ability to buy young women from the areas around the capital and even the Central Plains and the Jiangnan area. They could bring hundreds of people to the two Liao provinces at one time. In Taiping town, Chongshou restaurant was the most popular restaurant. It was the private property of a military officer with real power. Except for the green ant wine, almost all the famous Liang wine, such as Jiannan Chun, could be bought here as long as you had money. There were all kinds of women playing music and singing in the restaurant all year round. Their appearances were nothing more than average. However, it was a rare scene in the remote border. In the past 2 days, a pair of brother and sister came to Chongshou restaurant. The young woman held a pipa and told stories. The older brother was responsible for shouting and collecting money. This was not strange at all. However, the woman kept telling stories about the king of Beiliang, Su Fengnian. She told stories about how Su Fengnian walked across the Liang River Lake, how he entered Beimang alone, and how he won the hearts of the soldiers in Beiliang. This angered the residents of Taiping town. However, a group of people took the opportunity to bully the beautiful woman. They did not expect to be beaten by the ordinary-looking young man. Chongshou restaurant was happy to see this happen. They proposed that the woman be allowed to tell stories in the restaurant. They wanted her brother to fight in the arena every day. After 10 days, all the military experts near Taiping town lost. The young man from outside won 10 rounds in a row. The Chongshou restaurant, which was good at making money, started to become the banker again. It was estimated that they earned at least 1,000 taels of silver. The prostitution business in the brothels in the town decreased sharply. In the evening, the battle in Chongshou restaurant was over. A group of distinguished guests walked into the restaurant. The 4 of them asked for a table by the railing on the 2nd floor. The woman downstairs was preparing for the 2nd round of storytelling. Her brother had changed into a new set of clothes that were washed to the point of turning white. They were mended very hard. The brother and sister had traveled from Liangzhou to Lingzhou, and then from Lingzhou to Hezhou. They passed through Jizhou and arrived at this small town. Unlike the blind storytellers commonly seen in Liyang, the woman only had a pipa. When she was telling a story, she never shook her head, laughed, or cursed. When she talked about the character's sorrows or the intense emotions, she only raised her voice slightly. Most of the time, she spoke in a flat tone, as if she was just telling a story. As for whether the audience liked to hear it or not, and whether they were willing to reward her, she didn't care at all. The 4 guests sitting by the railing on the 2nd floor ordered a jar of Jiannan Chun wine, which was known as 1 caddy can break the throat and 2 caddies can burn the intestines. They also ordered a jar of ancient well-immortal brew, which was easy to drink and had a small after effect. Only 2 of the 4 people sat down. The younger one had a simple and unadorned long saber on his waist. He looked around with self-satisfaction and was in high spirits. The man who looked like the elder of the young man had an indifferent expression. After opening the jar of immortal brew, he drank by himself. The other 2 standing had 2 Liao border army standard warblades hanging from their waists. Although they didn't have the same status as the 2 seated here, others could tell with a single glance that they were extraordinary figures who led troops all year round. Otherwise, the aura of the battlefield on their bodies wouldn't be so strong. The young man stretched his neck and glanced at the people downstairs. He was a little impatient and frowned. Why isn't that Ji guy here yet? Looking at his posture, he really thinks that he's one of the top 10 masters in Great Snow Plateau. The older man with gray hair on his temples did not bat an eyelid. A burly man who was standing seemed to dislike this arrogant young man. He said with a fake smile, "General Yuan, Ji Lu An is one of the top 10 masters in Great Snow Plateau of Mount Hui. What's there to be proud of?" The young man called General Yuan drank a mouthful of liquor and sneered, "Only a country bumpkin would take a martial arts evaluation made by a little girl seriously. In the end, only the old master of the Wu family's sword tomb can barely be called a master. As for the others, Chai Ching Shan of the sword pool of Dongyue has little ability. It's fine if he can shut himself up in Guangling Taoism. As for this palace master of Nanjiang Dragon Palace who sneaked into Liaodong, who is he?" The young man slowly spun the wine cup with 2 fingers. He glanced at the person who exposed him and said with a smile, "There's also that #1 master of Nanzhao, Wei Miao, and the others. When they reach the Jianghu of the Central Plains, they will probably be beaten to a pulp. Haha, there's also that #1 swordsman of Great Peace City, Qi Jiajie. He's the funniest. Flying swords for thousands of miles. What a great lineup. What happened in the end? The swords did reach Hezhou, but there's no more news of Qi Jiajie. Of these top 10 masters, even if the other 5 were added together, they would probably not be worthy of any one of the 4 people in the martial arts evaluation." The burly man was about to retort when his colleague pulled his sleeve. In the end, he swallowed his words and only snorted coldly. Chapter 1571. The young man didn't continue to criticize. Instead, he turned his head and looked at a middle-aged man 2 tables away. The man was wearing a short-sleeved shirt with a green headband wrapped around his head. His calves were wrapped in leggings. He would only be mistaken as a mountain man who often walked the mountain roads. However, there was an extremely coquettish and plump woman sitting beside him. Her clothes were gorgeous, but it was not the brocade and satin of the rich families in Liyang. Instead, it was tie-dyed and colorful. It was hard not to be eye-catching. It was clearly the Miao people's attire from the 100,000 mountains in the southwest. The plump woman had a string of silver bells on her hands and feet. When she raised her hands or feet, it made a pleasant sound. On the table beside her was a crescent-shaped knife with a snow-white scabbard. When she drank, one of her legs was casually placed on the bench. If one looked at her from the side, her slender thighs and round buttocks were extremely attractive. The woman also noticed the young man's gaze. She smiled charmingly and drank the whole cup of wine in one gulp. She raised her eyebrows provocatively at the young man. The young man put down the wine cup and made a gesture of holding something heavy in front of his chest. The plump woman was teased. Instead of being annoyed, she laughed like a flower. In front of the man beside her, she pushed the wine jar on the table with her palm. The wine jar moved like rolling thunder and hit the young man's back in an instant. The latter did not seem to move, but the wine jar deviated from its trajectory and brushed past him. It just happened to spin on the table and then gradually stopped. The woman laughed with a clumsy Central Plains official's accent. "You look good. As long as you drink, I'll be your friend." The burly man who did not get along with the young man reminded softly, "This Miao couple is not ordinary Jianghu masters. The woman has already done something to the wine jar. The Miao people's goo is very strange and impossible to guard against. It's best not to touch it." At this moment, 2 people came upstairs. One looked like an old Confucian in a green robe. The other had 2 long and short swords hanging from his waist. Just by looking at the 2 scabbards, one could tell that they were precious swords. The man who had not interrupted and was about to raise his cup to drink gently put down the wine cup. The 2 people who were standing slightly separated to make way. The 2 guests who came as promised sat on the same bench. The old Confucian scholar looked respectful and said softly, "I am Cheng Baishuang from the countryside of southern border. Greetings to De Zhu Gua." The famous swordsman with a cold expression also said, "Dragon Palace Ji Lu and is honored to meet De Zhu Gua." After the death of the old Prince Liang, Su Shao, there was only one pillar of the country in the whole world. It was Gu Zhentang, who held half of the Tiger Seal military power in the Zhaoshi dynasty. Gu Zhentang smiled and nodded. "It must have been hard for the 2 of you to come to Liaodong from the southern border." After the 2 top masters of Nanjiang Taoism sat down, the couple also got up and walked over to sit on the only empty bench. The burly man behind De Zhugua who looked like a door god wanted to stop them, but Gu Zhentang had already picked up the wine jar with the poisonous insect. The general, who became the commander of Liaodong's Duo Yen cavalry after Tang Tai's Huang, quickly loosened his 5 fingers from the hilt of his sword. The woman first gave the young general surnamed Yuan a coquettish look, and then smiled at Gu Jiantang. My husband doesn't know how to speak your Central Plains language, so a woman like me is here to discuss important matters. General, please forgive me. Cheng Baishuang frowned and then relaxed in an instant. He asked with a smile, De Zhu Gua this is? Gu Jiantang didn't say anything. Aside from the young man beside him, he poured a bowl of wine for Cheng Baishuang, Ji Luan, and the couple. At the same time the young man who was ignored interrupted, Cheng Baishuang, Ji Luan, what's wrong? My father-in-law is personally welcoming you, and you don't want to accept my toast? You want to drink as a punishment? Ji Luan, who was not in a good mood, narrowed his eyes. He had traveled thousands of li to Taiping town. Cheng Baishuang calmly picked up the wine bowl, shook his head and said with a smile, Of course not. I'm just curious. Probably because she was sitting so close to Gu Jiantang, the woman put away her coquettish look and went straight to the point. My husband is called Wei Miao. He is somewhat famous in Nanzhao. Of course, he can't compare to Palace Master Ji and Sir Cheng. Originally, he would never set foot in the Central Plains, but there is no other way. The King of Shu and Sir Xie have spoken, so we have to make a trip. Gu Jiantang only had one daughter, so De Zhugua's son-in-law could only be Ji Zhou's general, Yuan Tingshan. Yuan Tingshan originally wanted to tease the woman, but unfortunately, he heard the storyteller downstairs talking about the young king surnamed Su who traveled to Mount Hui. Yuan Tingshan, who had an irreconcilable enmity with Su, sneered and suddenly stood up. With one hand on the railing, he fiercely slammed into the storyteller's brother like a bolt of lightning. The young man who had won 11 battles in Taiping town, crossed his arms in front of his chest, but he was still kicked by Yuan Tingshan. His slightly trembling hands put his elbows on a wine table. As a result, the entire table was flipped over. The wine and food splashed all over the man's body. The clothes he had just changed into were also affected. Yuan Tingshan stood on the spot and didn't follow up with another attack. He only laughed. Not bad. You've hidden yourself quite well. You're almost at the 2nd grade master realm. No wonder you're so powerful in this small town. I'm confused. The brother of a Bailiang storyteller? I think he's a master from Bailiang's Fu Shui room, right? Did he come here to spy on the military situation? That ordinary woman who was just a storyteller stared blankly for a moment. The young and taciturn man turned around and gave her an apologetic smile. Then he nodded and then shook his head. The smile on Yuan Tingshan's face became wider. However, the ruthlessness in his eyes and the killing intent all over his body made everyone in the restaurant tremble with fear. The young man, whose real identity was a Bailiang spy, said in a deep voice, It has nothing to do with Ariu. She's just a storyteller. I can die, but she can't. Yuan Tingshan laughed and said, Whether you die or not depends on whether I'm in a good mood or not. But she can't die. Why can't she? With your mediocre skills? Or do you think you can scare me with your identity as a Fu Shui room's man of sacrifice? The young man from the Fu Shui room wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth with his thumb and said, Of course I can't. The young Bailiang man of sacrifice, who was determined to die, grinned and said, In your Liaodong territory, you crazy dog Yuan can kill people. I can't stop you even if I risk my life. But do you dare to kill? Don't you find it strange that an ordinary storyteller can make me accompany her? Yuan Tingshan put his palm on the hilt of the world's #1 talisman knife. Now that you mention it, I'm almost scared to death. The young man said indifferently, Her name is Ariu. She's a guest of our protector General Chu. The young man added, She's also a friend of our prince. Although I don't know what the consequences will be if she dies in Liaodong, I'm sure that our prince will personally demand an explanation from the entire Liaodong. Yuan Tingshan suddenly gripped the Nanhua saber tightly and was about to pull it out to kill. Su Fengnian was far away in the northwest. Even if he was the prince of northern Liang who had 300,000 cavalrymen under his command, even if he was one of the 4 grandmasters in the world, Yuan Tingshan still wouldn't dare to kill a lowly Fu Shui room's men of sacrifice and an insignificant woman who could only earn money by telling stories. The Su Fengnian could barely take care of himself. How could he have the leisure to care about the life and death of a woman? However, at this moment, the great pillar of the state, Gu Jiantang, who had not stood up to greet the 2 groups of guests, had unknowingly stood near the railing and said to Yuan Tingshan downstairs, Enough. Yuan Tingshan did not turn around. The Nanhua saber was about to be unsheathed and draw blood. Gu Jiantang turned around expressionlessly and sat back in his seat. However, the famous saber he had given to Yuan Tingshan appeared in his hand. Yuan Tingshan strode out of the restaurant and left Taiping Town and Liaodong, returning to Ji Province. The woman sighed softly. The matter that the immortal-like scholar Xie Guaniying had personally told her was most likely a failure. The reason Gu Jiantang was acting like this was actually to tactfully refuse the couple. Because Nanjiang and Western Shu treated Bailiang, or more accurately, Su Fingnian, differently. Cheng Baishuang smiled and lowered her head to drink wine. The wine was not bad. Unfortunately, it was not the green ant wine that His Royal Highness talks about every day. Otherwise it would be even better. Chapter 1572. The group walked on the grass of the courtyard ranch. The ground was soft, and puddles of water would occasionally seep out from around their boots. It was clear that the pastures of Longxi were fertile. As a breeding ground for horses on the Bailiang Road, second only to the Xianli Ranch, Longxi had a unique climate. Since ancient times, it had been an important source of horses for every prosperous dynasty. The Dafeng dynasty raised 300,000 horses around Longxi and set up the post of Longxi horse husbandry supervisor. Liu Zhe, who was said to be on par with the founding emperor of the Dafeng dynasty, had collected 160,000 warhorses during his 2 expeditions to the north. The nobles of northern Mang's Longguan Pass were actually the survivors of the Qin dynasty, who migrated north during the chaos of war 800 years ago. If one traced their roots back, they were once the citizens of the Qin dynasty between Longxi and Tongguan. Among the group, the manager of the courtyard ranch, Zhao Luyuan, was particularly nervous. There was nothing he could do. The 5 or 6 people behind him who were temporarily acting as background had official positions, such as Horned Eagle Captain Luo Hongkai. Without exception, they were all the 14 captains of Bailiang. As for the only one who did not have an official position, he was the general of the Bailiang army, Shi Fu, who had been the general of Liangzhou for a few years. Unfortunately, he was dragged down by the label of the previous Bailiang governor-general. Before the new king of Liang could succeed him, Shi Fu had tactfully resigned. For some reason, he was brought up again. Zhao Luyuan did not know whether Shi Fu was going to be punished or make a comeback. Other than the young man beside him being Su Fengnian, the main reason for Zhao Luyuan's uneasiness was that the courtyard ranch had been given a critical order this time. They could only take out less than 5,000 warhorses, and only 600 A-grade warhorses. It was still a lot short of the king of Bailiang's request. However, Zhao Luyuan knew that if the king had come half a year earlier to ask for horses, he would have been able to provide 8,000 A-grade Bailiang warhorses, let alone 8,000 regardless of grade. Previously, the Governor-General of Bailiang had urgently transferred 10,000 warhorses from here. These 600 A-grade warhorses were the last of what he had left behind with great difficulty. The imperial envoy from Huayang Pass who had come to the ranch to ask for horses had been so anxious that his eyes had turned red. He had cursed that person for doing something shady, and said that what was so great about the Governor-General of Bailiang. Zhao Luyuan slapped the table and declared that he would submit to the king's Wutongin of Mount Qingliang. However, now that Prince Liang, Su Fengnian, was by his side, Zhao Luyuan did not dare to say anything bad about the Bailiang Governor-General of Huayang Pass to his face. He could only ramble on and on about how he was incompetent and had failed to live up to his expectations. Zhao Luyuan was not stupid. Not just Bailiang, everyone in the world knew of the relationship between Protector General Chu and the new Prince Liang. It was just that they had different surnames and were truly family. Su Fengnian and Zhao Luyuan walked side by side on the grass of the ranch. Behind them was Shi Fu, who was in the prime of his life but was silent all year round. There was also Horned Eagle Commandant Luo Hongkai and the others. Among them was Longxi Commandant Zhao Rongguang, who was in charge of the security of Liangzhou's western gate. The courtyard ranch was vast and the scenery was beautiful. Longxi's winter was long and there was no summer. It had a unique climate of 6 months of frost, so it was much cooler than other places. However, other than the expressionless Su Fengnian, Luo Hongkai and the others appeared to be burning with anxiety. Even Shi Fu, who had retired from the army for almost 2 years, was frowning. Su Fengnian looked at the lush grass in front of him and was filled with emotion. Since Dafeng's territory extended to the western regions, half of the world's army and horses came from Lianglong. Many members of the imperial family, nobles, and generals raised horses here privately. They liked to use the number of horses they raised to compare their power. Li Gongda, the Bailiang Taoist administrator who was good at making money, had suggested early on whether or not they could lift the ban on horses and sell horses below B class to the officials and nobles of Great Peace City and the Central Plains. This would definitely be a huge income and reduce the tax burden on Bailiang. However, Su Xiao had directly rejected the idea. After the scholars passed away, there was no shortage of scholars who proposed the same strategy. They made a big deal out of the issue of cold horses. Without reducing the reserves of A, B, and C war horses, they could still give taxes and increase the soldiers' pay and provisions. They could make friends with the nobles of the capital and express goodwill to the Liang Zhao clan. It could be said that there were only benefits and no disadvantages. Song Dongming's Dragon's Gate and Su Weisheng's Wutong'an didn't dare to make a decision on their own. After handing it over to Su Fengnian to make the decision, they also thought deeply and put the matter aside in the end. Su Fengnian stopped at the top of a gently sloping hill. He raised his eyes and looked out. There was lush greenery all around. Su Fengnian suddenly turned his head and smiled at Zhao Luyuan, who was almost 50 years old. Lord Zhao, this is actually the second time we've met. Back then, this king was still young and accompanied Su Xiao here to avoid the summer heat. I remember that at that time, Lord Zhao had just retired from the border army of Liangzhou and had just taken office at Tianjing Ranch. At that time, there were many things waiting to be done at the ranch. Lord Zhao patted his chest and promised Su Xiao that in less than 10 years, Longxi would become the largest ranch in Liang. I don't know if Lord Zhao still remembers that you promised Su Xiao that one day you would bring out the #1 divine steed in the world to celebrate His Royal Highness, coming to my coming of age? The old man who had dealt with war horses all his life was immediately moved. With a trembling voice he said, "Your Highness still remembers, you still remember. How could this lowly one dare to forget? Not to mention that Tianjing Ranch has been carefully and conscientiously cultivating fine horses. For all these years, they have been entrusted to the generals and crossbowmen of the border army. As long as you see that extraordinarily handsome king of wild horses on the plains of the desert, after capturing it, you must send it to Tianjing Ranch." In fact, 4 years ago, there really was a divine steed sent to the ranch, but when your Highness reached your coming of age, this old man mistakenly thought that your Highness had forgotten about it. I was also afraid that people would say that I was a disgraceful official who didn't do his job properly and only knew how to flatter others. After hesitating for many days, in the end, I still didn't send it to the prince's mansion on Mount Qingliang. In the end, I couldn't endure the hundreds of pleas of our cavalry army's deputy commander Zhou, and could only send it. If only I had known earlier. Sigh, this old man really regrets it to death. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "It's all right. For our Bailiang cavalry to be where it is today, the Tianjing Ranch, Shenli Ranch, and all the other ranches big and small, have contributed greatly. Up until now, this king has only been on the battlefield a few times. If we say that he has 2 B-class horses to ride, it's barely enough. If he has another A-class horse, it would be a waste of natural resources." Probably knowing that Zhao Weiyuan was going to fight for him, Su Fengnian waved his hand and said, "You all go back first. I have something to discuss with General Shi." Everyone left, leaving behind Shi Fu, who was widely acknowledged in Bailiang to have a bumpy career as an official. This person and the Yuzhou provincial governor Hu Kuei were known as the twin jade annulus of Liangzhou in the past. Although they were young, they were both old men of the border army who had made great contributions to the military. The term twin jade annulus was first used to describe the 2 cavalry generals who first emerged in the Spring and Autumn War, Wu Qi and Su Pu. At that time, Su Xiao was still fighting in the Spring and Autumn War and had not yet been conferred the title of king. Therefore, the 2 of them were known as the twin jade annulus of the Su family. Today, one of them lived in seclusion in Dunhuang city of Beimang, while the other went to Xishan to assist Chen Jibao. Chen Jibao left Liangzhou and entered Xishan, while at the same time, Su Fengnian became the hereditary king of Bailiang. This was the dividing line between Shi Fu and Hu Kuei in the officialdom. Hu Kuei rose again and became a high-ranking official, while Shi Fu, who was of a higher rank, was overshadowed and retired to the countryside. But strangely, both Mount Qingliang and the Huaiyang Pass Protectorate headquarters ignored Shi Fu's resignation. Even when Chu Lushan later took up the post of general of Liangzhou, he did not explicitly inform the Liangzhou military that Shi Fu had retired from the army. Military reports would still be sent every half a day to the Liangzhou general, Shi Fu, who was resting at home. Chapter 1573. Su Fengnian asked softly, General Shi, this time, the Western Shu sect sent 10,000 elite soldiers to the Guangling sect. Wei Fuqing and Dian Xiongniu were only appointed as deputy generals. An outsider, Huyan Wanruo, was appointed as the main general. As for the border between Beiliang and Western Shu, Chen Jibao assigned a young man named Che Yi to guard the northern gate of Western Shu. Regarding these two matters, what do you think, General Shi? Shi Fu's brows furrowed even more, but he remained silent. Su Fengnian quietly waited for him to continue. It seemed that he was determined to wait for the former confidant of the king of Shu to open his mouth to prove his loyalty. However, Shi Fu gritted his teeth and remained silent. His expression became increasingly gloomy. If the young vassal king asked about Ji Liuzhou, Huda city of Liangzhou, or Gourd city of Yuzhou, Shi Fu believed that he would tell him everything he knew. However, he was indebted to Chen Jibao for nurturing him. Regardless of whether Chen Jibao was going against Beiliang or not, as long as Chen Jibao did not explicitly target Beiliang, Shi Fu would not turn against Chen Jibao. Even if he angered Su Fengnian today, Shi Fu would not hesitate to do so. Shi Fu actually admired this young man from the Su family. However, Shi Fu could not cross the threshold in his heart when it came to some matters that crossed his bottom line. That was why Zhong Hongguo, the great general of Huaihua, made an exception for Shi Fu and regarded him as a thorn in his side. Su Fengnian did not wait for an answer. He asked again, if this king says that you can safely move 300 people to Western Shu, will you go there? Shi Fu hesitated for a moment and smiled bitterly. Unlike Wei Fuqing and Dian Xiongniu, or Che Yi, who came from Beimang, my family is a big family in Liangzhou. Even if I am willing to go to Western Shu and Prince does not stop me, many elders in my family who are used to the customs of Beiliang will not agree to leave their home. This has nothing to do with whether I can become a high-ranking official in Western Shu again. To be honest, Prince, I have no choice but to take 10,000 steps back. In fact, if the Shi family really moved the ancestral tablets to Western Shu, not to mention others, the 3 people of my generation in Beiliang and the 4 nephews serving in the border army of Liangzhou will probably stay in Beiliang. In this way, before we even leave Beiliang, the Shi family will be torn apart. Su Fengnian put on a fake smile and said, at least General Shi is honest with me. Shi Fu chuckled and said, there's no point in hiding it. I know that the Shi family has spies planted in the Dushui chamber for many years. It's not that I have such discerning eyes, but that before Chu Lushan became the protector general of the northern Liang, he made a special trip to the Shi family to meet honestly with me. Therefore, in these 2 years, I have not been able to sleep peacefully. It is funny to say that in my early years in the army, even if I went deep into Beimang and rested on the horses, I would still sleep better than on my own bed. Su Fengnian did not comment on Chu Lushan's spies in the Shi family. He changed the topic and asked with a smile, the courtyard pasture currently has 800 white horse guards, Luo Hongkai and the 2 captains 3,400 cavalry, plus the Longxi troops of the pasture, and the 2,000 cavalry left behind by Zhao Rongguang, there are still less than 8,000. This king can only wait for 3 days. One of the 2 captains of Liangzhou's Tongguan Pass, Xianin Ma, will also lead 3,000 elite cavalry over. Their numbers will exceed 10,000. General Shi, do you think that these 10,000 cavalry rushing into the battlefield of Liuzhou will be able to provide timely assistance, or will distant water not be able to quench the immediate thirst? The stone talisman asked. If the stone talisman speaks bluntly, will your highness really listen? Su Fengnian said calmly, let's hear it first. You, Shi Fu, are not Yan Wenluan or Chen Yunchue, the famous generals of the spring and autumn period. You are also not part of the Su family like Chu Lushan and Yuan Zuozong, who have made great contributions. You do not have the right to make this king listen to whatever you say. Shi Fu sighed and said slowly, in my opinion, the 10,000 cavalry of the king is not like a cup of water on a burning cart of firewood, but it may be beneficial to the situation of Lu province. It is no different from the situation of Beiliang. If I were the king, I would be more thorough. I would let the 2 deputy generals of Lingzhou, Wang Ji and Huang Xiaokuai lead the troops. With the Yanxia commandant, Jiao Wui and the other commandants as the main force, not only would the cavalry of Liangzhou enter Lu province to solve the urgent situation, but I would also decisively send the cavalry of Lingzhou north to Lu province. After defeating Lu Gui's army on the western front of Beimang, They would quickly fill the gap outside Liangzhou Pass and south of Huaiyang Pass. Shifu suddenly felt the killing intent of the young king. He said calmly, "Originally, I did not know the situation. But since I came to Tianjing Ranch and heard about the number of horses in this ranch, Shifu can more or less guess the plan of the king and the protectorate general. There is no need for the king to think too much about it." Su Fengnian nodded. He squatted down and pulled out a piece of licorice and chewed it. Shifu continued, "In the final analysis, in the Battle of Liangmang, outside Liangzhou Pass, Liuzhou, and Yuzhou, there will be victories and defeats. But the place that really decides the survival of Beiliang is only outside Liangzhou Pass. If we lose here, Beiliang will also lose the general trend of Beiliang that the great general and the king worked so hard to accumulate for 2 generations. In the spring and autumn period, there were many ridiculous battles where the great general won a great battle but caused the king's country to perish. Before the final outcome of the Battle of West Wall was decided, everyone was optimistic about West Chu, who had won a series of small victories. However, the great general wanted to complete the siege of West Wall at the cost of rapidly consuming his troops. He did not hesitate to use a few troops in an important but not critical battle to lure most of the elites of West Chu to attack, just to create a small gap in the defense of West Wall. The Battle of Princess Tomb that Commander Yuan shown brilliantly is a clear proof. Su Fengnian suddenly stood up. "General Shi, I'll leave these 10,000 cavalry to you. In 3 days at the latest, you'll take them to Liuzhou to reinforce Qingcang City and Longxiang Army." Shi Fu was stunned on the spot. He did not understand why he could take on such a great responsibility, and also wondered why Su Fengnian did not personally lead the army. Su Fengnian spat out the chewed grass root and said in a low voice, "I received news this morning that Huta City has fallen. Beimang's army is pressing on Huaiyang, Liuya, and Fuling towns." Shi Fu's expression changed greatly, and he said in shock, "How could Huta City fall so quickly?" Su Fengnian turned and looked to the north. Dong Zhuo is a madman. Previously, he would send people to dig a tunnel every few days to their deaths. There were 16 tunnels, and as a result, 5,000 people died. However, no one would have thought that this guy did not dig 16 secret tunnels at all, but a total of 38. 12 of them only dug to the outside of the city, and then with the cooperation of the ground siege. Su Fengnian did not say anything else. Shi Fu muttered, "This madman, this son of a b***tch. Su Fengnian turned and said to Shi Fu, "I'm going to Huaiyang Pass immediately. Shi Fu, from now on, you'll regain your position as general of Liangzhou. Not only the 10,000 cavalry, all the Lingzhou cavalry that will enter Liangzhou will be under your command." Shi Fu exhaled heavily and cupped his fists. "As you wish." Chapter 1574. Su had never thought that he would be able to live a life of both money and leisure. He still remembered that when he grew up in the small town of Beimang, he was only idle and idle. But after coming to Nanzhao, especially after this old man Zhao had formed an alliance with a certain white-clothed man, his life truly began to flourish. He lived in a summer residence that was said to have once belonged to the former Nanzhao royal family. He ate delicacies of all kinds, and even the latrine was more luxurious than the place he had lived in before. Occasionally, there would be guests in the night, each of them more frightening than the last. Su had seen 6 or 7 of the old nobles who had survived the old Nanzhao. More and more unfamiliar faces appeared around this old man Zhao, especially those old men who were about the same age as this old man Zhao, and liked to add something like minister or assistant minister in front of their names. Almost every time they saw Su, they would weep uncontrollably. Su knew that these people should be the old officials of the previous Western Shu dynasty, who had come after hearing the news. According to what this old man Zhao had said, Su should listen more and speak less. He should only silently cry with these old people. If he really could not cry, he should first rub a handful of Nanzhao's special little sparrow pepper powder on his palm and pretend to lower his head to wipe away his tears. Once he wiped away his tears, it would be hard not to cry even if he did not want to. Su had tried it once, and did not want to try it a second time. His eyes were so red and swollen that they did not recover for 2 or 3 days. But at that time, the effect was obvious. In any case, he had moved the group of old officials of Western Shu to tears. The oldest one even fainted on the spot from crying. Today, Su had been thrown by this old man Zhao into a library called Mu Gung Lu. He did not want him to really read for pleasure. He only needed to pretend to cultivate his body and mind in the library. Su took advantage of the fact that no one was watching and sat on the railing of the tall building. Beside him stood the blind female zither player, Shui Songguan. After the two of them had almost died at the hands of Chen Jibao, Su no longer pestered the blind zither player to play the game of young hero and demon. It was probably that once bitten, twice shy. He was somewhat afraid of the so-called Jianghu. These days, Shui Songguan had been helping this old man Zhao with the matter of the 18 tribes of Nanzhao. She was very busy and had traveled to almost half of Nanzhao's territory. Su missed her very much. But when they really met again, he did not know what to say. The man and woman were silent like this. Su raised his head and finally spoke slowly. In the past, I loved to dream during the day. I thought that perhaps I was the posthumous child of some important person, or the illegitimate child of a large family that could not be seen in public. Perhaps one day, I would recognize my ancestors and return to the family and become completely rich. Only now do I realize that I really am the crown prince of a country. It is a pity that my dream has come true. Only now do I realize that even if I wear the dragon robe, even if I really am the crown prince, I do not look like one. Fortunately, the old master had taught me a lot about the ways of the rich and powerful in the past year, such as the Tang Dynasty tablet, the Qing Tian yellow jelly, the banana leaf blue flower, and a bunch of other things. I don't know why, but I've always liked valuable things since I was young. But are these things valuable enough? Looking at them, in the beginning, I was very excited and wanted to hug them to sleep. But later, I became less and less spirited. How should I put it? It's like a poor boy rolling in the mud. One day, he foolishly married a beautiful wife. It's not that he didn't like her, but that he understood that in the end, he would not be able to protect her. She would have to leave him one day. The young zither player who had accompanied Su and Zhao Dingxiu from Beimang to Nanzhao was blind, but her heart was connected. She smiled gently and said, "The Su family has been the ruler of Western Shu for a full 200 years. Although it was lost to your father for 20 years, with this old man Zhao Dingxiu's assistance and the promise of the king of Shu, then this family property actually has a chance to be protected. Just like what Chen Jibao said, in the future, although you cannot be the emperor of Shu, you can at least be the king of Liang Shu. Like this, it can be said that you have not let down the ancestors of your Su family." Su sighed and said, "If not for Su Fengnian finding us in Beimang, how could I possibly be where I am today? The books say that a good bird chooses a tree to nest in. The logic is quite reasonable. But for people like me, logic is never in the books. I can only rely on my fists or..." The crown prince of the previous dynasty, who had escaped from the Western Shu palace in his infancy, smiled bitterly and pointed at his heart. "Or it is here. Although I, Su, have always been at odds with Su Fengnian and have always spoken ill of him in front of you, but you should know that in my life, I only have one friend in Su Fengnian." Of course, what kind of person is Su Fengnian? He is the most powerful king in the world, one of the 4 great grandmasters. He is also so damn handsome, and is known as the Northern Su and the Southern Song. He is also so knowledgeable. Such a rare romantic figure may not necessarily treat me, Su, as a friend. But I really do treat him as a friend. In the end, when I came to Nanzhao, I received a great benefit. It was not easy for me to gain a firm foothold here. Just as I was about to repay him, that expressionless white-clothed man interfered. This old man threw Su Fengnian's Bailiang to one side. I also know that this is something that can't be helped, but in my heart, I really feel bad. Shui Songguan said softly, "You said it yourself, this is something that can't be helped." Su fiercely rubbed her cheeks and then held her face with both hands. She said indistinctly, "Yes, something that can't be helped. I am a person with no ambition and no real talent. Other than eating, drinking, sleeping, using, and acting here every day, what can I do?" She hesitated and then sighed. In reality, this old man also does not feel good in his heart. He often goes to drink with your blacksmith uncle to relieve his boredom. Once, he got drunk and lost his composure. Su put down her hands and placed them on the railing. She said with a bitter smile, "I have never blamed this old man. If this old man did not play the role of father and mother and raise me, there would not be me, Su. Furthermore, do you think I do not know what kind of temper the old man has? He is as smelly and hard as a rock in a latrine. If not for me, for the Western Shu dynasty that was long gone, this old man would not act against his will." Shui Songguan nodded. Su suddenly sighed emotionally. "I have nothing to do all day, Sometimes I feel tired. Then whether it is Su Fengnian, who bears the life and death of 300,000 Bailiang cavalry, or that ambitious king of Shuqin Jibao, do these people really enjoy themselves, or do they also feel tired? The blind zither player shook her head and smiled. I don't know. Su turned her head and smiled brightly. If one day I can really put down everything to accompany you in Jianghu, if I tell the new heroes and masters that Su Fengnian used to eat and drink with me, would I have a lot of face? The woman thought of the time when she was in Beimang and almost killed the young king in the rainy alley. She smiled. I can't have any more face. Su's smile was intoxicating. Although I am still very jealous of Su Fengnian, there are some people in the world. No matter what, as long as you know them, you can't hate them. Isn't that right? The blind zither player smiled and did not speak. Su carefully asked, You really don't like him? To tell you the truth, if I were a woman, I am afraid that I would not be able to forget him. She said helplessly. Why would I like him? Because Su Fengnian looks handsome? But I'm blind. Su scratched her head and felt that there was something wrong with this reason. She leaned on the railing. If we go to Jianghu in the Central Plains in the future, should I play the role of a murderous female devil and you pretend to be a chivalrous young hero? Su looked into the distance and her eyes were firm. No. We are immortal couples. The blind woman blushed for the first time. She turned her head and said softly, Su, I am blind. Su lowered her head and looked at the back of her head. She said gently, I know. The female expert in the finger Xian realm said softly and timidly, I am older than you. Su smiled. I know that too. She turned around and raised her head to look at Su. With a faint smile she said, If in the future when we go to the Jianghu of the Central Plains, where there are countless beauties, and I find out that you have taken a few more glances at the heroines and fairies, I, Shuesong official, will directly kill them. Su said resentfully. Well, I really didn't know before, but now I know. She smiled sweetly. I lied to you. Su put her palm on her forehead. Although I am not blind, I only have you in my eyes. In the back mountains of Bailiang, two old men, Mi Qiong and Pang He, sat in front of a simple thatched cottage. A small stool separated them by some dishes. Then another old man arrived as promised. He carried 2 jars of green ant wine that had been kept in the cellar of the prince's mansion on Mount Qingliang for many years. This old man had a white face and no beard. Whether it was the way he walked or the way he spoke, there was a gloomy air. Mi Qiong and Pang He, as famous scholars of Bailiang, knew this very well. After they became familiar with each other, they never exposed him. This old man surnamed Zhao was a eunuch. As for why he came to Mount Qingliang for retirement, Mi Qiong and Pang He had no interest in finding out. At first, the 2 famous scholars didn't have a good impression of the old man named Zhao Siku. However, after the old eunuch came to the back of the mountain every now and then to give them a hand, and in addition to the fact that Zhao Siku was much older than the ordinary craftsman, his hands and feet were nimble. His speech and elegance were not inferior to the refined scholars, and he was especially meticulous in his work. Over time, the 3 of them were of similar age and became good friends who could sit and drink together. Chapter 1575. Mi Qiong and Pang He smiled and gestured for Zhao Siku to sit down. The 3 old men, whose ages added up to almost 200 years, sat around a stool. The 2 Bailiang calligraphers, who hadn't even had time to change their clothes, were still covered in the fragrance of ink. They each gulped down the wine in their cups and exhaled heavily. Their faces were somewhat gloomy. Zhao Siku was a senior eunuch who had once been in charge of the Directorate of Credentials in the Liang Imperial Palace. Although he had taken off the red python gown that was still extremely eye-catching in the palace, his ability to read people's expressions was still as shrewd and ruthless. However, Zhao Siku didn't say anything. He took a small sip of wine and picked a relatively casual topic to start the conversation. I just came back from the Green Deer Cave Academy. The Yellow Mountain Lord asked me to ask 2 old friends for a few calligraphy pieces. I didn't dare to carelessly agree to it, and only said that I would pass on the message. Mi Qiong shook his head. Old Pang and I don't have the leisure to write calligraphy pieces these days. I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint Brother Zhao and the Yellow Mountain Lord. How could Zhao Siku not see that Mi Qiong and Pang He, who had been inscribing tombstones all day long? At this moment, their wrists were still trembling as they raised their cups. Their mental and physical exertion was nothing more than this. So he smiled and said, "It's fine, it's fine. The Yellow Mountain Lord has already said that this matter isn't urgent. He can wait. He can wait a few years or even 10 years. Peng He smiled. As long as His Highness chases away the Baimang barbarians, let alone 3 or 4 calligraphy pieces, even 30 or 40 would be personally delivered to the Yellow Mountain Lord's Green Deer Cave Academy. But Brother Zhao, we're not outsiders, so I'll say the ugly words first. Old Me and I have heard that many foreign scholars in the academy are not good people. They criticize our Bailiang's military and political affairs. They always think that if they come to the prince's mansion on Mount Qingliang or the Huaiyang Pass Protectorate Manor, they can turn the tide. These little bastards don't think that it's easy to just stand there and talk. Just because His Highness is easy to talk to, they can take a mile after taking an inch. Is Huang Chong not going to do anything about it? He shook his head and said, "It's not that we can't do anything about it. It's just that if we don't do anything about it, we won't be able to do anything about it. Besides, the scholars in Bailiang have changed a lot compared to when they first came to Bailiang. Occasionally, there will still be some scholars who don't know the gravity of the situation. However, their original intention is for the good of Bailiang. Many of the young people who came to Bailiang with the mentality of moving trees and people alive in mind have unknowingly considered themselves to be Bailiang people. This is a great thing." Me, who had once smashed his precious inkstone in front of Su Fengnian, grunted in agreement. The seeds of learning, the seeds of learning. These young people have truly taken root and sprouted in Bailiang. Sooner or later, our Bailiang will also have towering trees that the scholars of the Central Plains look up to. It will become a towering scholar forest. Peng He raised his cup and paused for a moment. He couldn't help but sigh. "I'm just afraid that we won't be able to see that day." Me, who was more emotional, said angrily, "Let's not talk about Yao Baifeng, who went to the Imperial College in the capital. His morals and knowledge are the best in the world. He is indeed worthy of the title of eminent scholar. Even if he leaves Bailiang, I still hope that Master Yao can make a name for himself in the Imperial Court. However, this Yen Jieshi is really a good-for-nothing. He relied on his connections to become a Grand Secretary and forgot his roots. After it was said that he had a chance to become one of the vice presidents of the next examination, he spread the word that the number of people who are qualified to enter Bailiang for the examination in the capital is going to be cut in half from the usual 40 people in the past. Only 20 people are allowed to participate in the examination. To think that I wrote so many calligraphy pieces and birthday couplets for this old thing in the past. I wish I could chop off my own hands." Peng He sneered. "That turtle Yen is just trying to avoid arousing suspicion. Let's count with our fingers. Master Yao of the older generation, Chen Wang and Sun Yin of the younger generation, are all top scholars in the Imperial Court. Even that assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Jean Lanting, who is also a vice president, is also from Bailiang. Perhaps this time, the reduction of Bailiang's examination quota is a sinister scheme that Yen Jieshi and Jean Lanting, one old and one young, came from Bailiang." Zhao Siku smiled playfully. "Don't worry, my 2 old friends. From my point of view, this time, Bailiang's quota isn't going to be reduced. It's the exact opposite. It's very simple. More and more scholars are entering Bailiang. How can the Imperial Court not panic? At this time, Yen Jieshi and Jean Lanting's suggestion is just for show. Those high-ranking officials in the center of the Imperial Court won't accept them. On the contrary, they will increase the quota. Not only that, of these Bailiang scholars coming to the capital for the examination, if nothing unexpected happens, there will be a good number of lucky ones who are doing well in Great Peace City. The Imperial Court just wants to use this opportunity to tell us, the scholars of Bailiang, that if you learn both civil and martial arts, you can be of use to the Imperial family. From now on, the Imperial Court will not give a low price. Flowers grow in the wall. Fragrance grows outside the wall." Peng He paused and gritted his teeth. This Imperial Court is too shameless. Mi Qiong was even more direct. "If I were the prince, I would just stop these scholars and keep the goodies within the family." Zhao Siku shook his head and smiled. Bailiang has never done such a despicable thing since the time of the great general. In the hands of the current prince, he probably still won't do it. Perhaps in the eyes of many Liang officials, this is a stupid thing to do. However, from my point of view, justice is in the hearts of the people. That's enough. Mi Qiong nodded. Yes, justice is in the hearts of the people. Peng He finished the wine in his cup in one gulp. He gripped the empty cup tightly and said with a hoarse voice, "The governor of Tigerhead City, Lu Jinu, is dead. Lieutenant Chu Hanqing is dead. Lieutenant Ma Jili is dead. All the infantry and cavalry in Tigerhead City are dead. Haluku of Yuzhou, Crouching Bao City, Luanhe City, Shaoguang City, Qingcang City in Liuzhou. So many places, so many Bailiang frontier army, so many people have died. Does the Liang Imperial Court know? Do the people of the Central Plains know?" Peng He put down his cup and hammered his chest with his hand. He choked with sobs. "I don't care if they know or not. Mi Qiong and I, these two old farts, have personally engraved the names of so many young Bailiang men. Every day, the white-haired people have to send the black-haired people off. I'm so bored." Zhao Siku, who had once been a pawn of the Zhao family to watch over Deva Gao Shulu, was silent. "Young master, if you didn't die so young, if you could see this scene today, would you regret choosing Chen Zhibao back then and not helping Su Fengyan as much as Mr. Li Yishan did?" It had not yet entered autumn, but Jizhou was already in a troubled state. At this time, Kai Nan, the newly appointed Jidushi of the Lianghuai Path, and Han Lin, who later became the administrator, quickly became the focus of discussion in the capital. The officials of the capital were not willing to speak well of this general who had been Gu Jiantong's trusted aide in the past. However, the former assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Han Lin, was a well-known civil official in Great Peace City. Thus, most of the officials of the capital held a sympathetic attitude. They all felt that it was a pity that Sir Han's life was full of misfortune. For some reason, during this period of time, no one mentioned a person surnamed Zhao who had entered the Lianghuai Path earlier than Kai and Han. Even though he was the third son of the previous emperor, although he could not compare to the great Prince Zhao Wu and the current emperor, his mother was still the legitimate daughter of the Peng family, the leader of the Northern Scholar Group. However, after Zhao Xiong, who had been given the title of King of Han and had taken over Jizhou, left the capital, it was like a clay ox entering the ocean. There was no news of him. It had to be said that this third prince had once been a well-known figure in Great Peace City. He had never stopped being a romantic. When Zhao Xiong was at his peak, the four young masters of the capital, led by Wang Yuanran, were still in some corner looking on with envy. Of the 6 sons of the previous emperor, the eldest, Zhao Wu, had taken over Liaodong. He was also the only prince who held the military power of the Tiger Seal. He was given the title of General of the North and assisted General Gu Jiantang and the old king of the northern vassal, Zhao Sui, to guard the north. The second prince, Zhao Wan, had gone to Gongnam-do in the misty rain and lush forests. The fifth prince, Zhao Hong, had been given the title of King of Yu and had taken over the old Dongyue. The sixth prince, Zhao Chun, was still young and had not left the capital yet. There was a lake in the newly built King of Han's residence that Zhao Xiong named Hearing Wave Lake. Everyone knew that there was a Hearing Wave Lake in Bailiang Palace. There was a pavilion in the center of Hearing Wave Lake. It was surrounded by water and there was no bridge. One had to use a lotus-picking boat to cross. In the pavilion, there was a rattan bed and a bamboo table. There were several plump peonies in a vase. Smoke rose from an incense burner. Zhao Xiong, dressed in plain white casual clothes, reclined on the bed with a wine cup in his hand. There was a female servant in front of the king of the northern vassal, holding an ancient book in her hand. There was also a servant girl standing behind Zhao Xiong, fanning him to get rid of the summer heat. Zhao Xiong drank a cup of wine when he read a page of the book. He did not talk to anyone and enjoyed himself. The afternoon passed slowly in the young king of Han's leisure. Zhao Xiong glanced at the sky outside the window. Soon, a servant girl helped him put on his boots. She came to the window and squinted at the motionless figure on the shore of the lake. Zhao Xiong said, "No wonder you can be the youngest general of a province in my dynasty. You really work hard." Zhao Xiong left the pavilion and took the lotus boat back to the shore. After going ashore, he walked to the Jizhou general who was in a precarious situation. When the king of the northern vassal approached, the latter cupped his fist and said in a deep voice, "This General Yuan Tingshan greets your Royal Highness, King of Han." Zhao Xiong casually waved his hand and said with a smile, "General Yuan, if you have something to say, just say it." Yuan Tingshan slowly raised his head. He stood on the shore for an entire afternoon, but his eyes were shining. There was no trace of depression on his face, and there was no flattery on his face. "I beg your Royal Highness to write a few bad words on the secret memorial that can reach the imperial study." Chapter 1576. Zhao Xiong pretended to be surprised and said, "How did General Yuan know that this king has the responsibility to submit secret memorials? And why did this king say bad things about you? This king has heard that you, Yuan Tingshan, are in a bad situation. Not only did you not get any benefits from your father-in-law, recently even some of the trusted aides that you managed to win over have gone to Ji Province's Deputy General Han Feng. Even Jidushi Kai has closed his door to you. Not to mention Military Commissioner Han. Today, you came to this king's mansion and waited for an entire afternoon. Shouldn't you be waiting for timely help? Why are you adding fuel to the fire? Are you tired of being a general and want to be a prisoner to try something new?" Listening to the king of Han's sarcasm, Yuan Tingshan's expression did not change. He maintained a respectful posture of cupping his fist and bowing. With a sincere tone, he said, "This time, I came to visit with 10,000 taels of gold and 10 chests of calligraphy and paintings." Listening to this young man who was privately scolded as a mad dog by some officials, Zhao Xiong became absent-minded for a moment. For some reason, he thought of a scene. It was a scene that he had never seen with his own eyes, but he had heard of it many times. Many years ago, there was a young general who was similar to this, begging to give gifts to people in the Ministry of War of Liyang. Zhao Xiong raised his head to look at the gorgeous sky filled with burning clouds and said to himself, "It's a pity it's not raining." Yuan Tingshan raised his head to look at the obviously absent-minded king of Han. He lowered his head and quietly bit his lips. Of the two fathers-in-law, Great General Gu Jiantang had clearly stated that he would not lend a helping hand to the rotten situation in Ji Province. As for the Li family's Yanbao, they had also vaguely revealed that the nearly 10,000 private cavalry of the Li family was the last of the family's assets. They would not be given to him, the son-in-law, to be squandered. Even if the 10,000 private cavalry were to fight, they would only fight in Ji Province. If permitted, they would even move to the north of Gangnam-do. They would definitely not let Yuan Tingshan bring them to the border of Ji Province to fight to the death with Bei Mang. As a result, the Ji Prefecture General's residence, which was originally flourishing with each passing day, was now plagued by both internal and external problems. However, Yuan Tingshan didn't care about these things. He could even take a step back in his official career and give up his position as Ji Province's general. However, Yuan Tingshan was extremely wary of one person. That was the young emperor sitting on the dragon throne in Great Peace City. Yuan Tingshan was afraid that he would become a useless general in the eyes of this ambitious emperor. Once this fatal impression was formed in the emperor's mind, it would be meaningless even if Yuan Tingshan won 100 battles. Therefore, Yuan Tingshan came to beg the king of Han Zhao Xiong, begging him to impeach him in the secret memorial. Only in this way could the young emperor feel that the entire Ji province, from top to bottom, was rejecting Yuan Tingshan, like a lonely official in the imperial court. Only then would he have the chance to rise again. Gold? This king's surname is Zhao. Does he lack such things? Antique calligraphy and paintings? This king has personally touched more things in his life than you, Yuan Tingshan, have seen. Zhao Xiong patted Yuan Tingshan's shoulder. Therefore, Yuan Tingshan, in the future, when you have a meteoric rise, don't forget who it was that helped you when you were at the end of your rope. Yuan Tingshan's left hand tightly gripped the back of his right hand, his veins bulging. "I swear I will never forget." Zhao Xiong bent down slightly and said softly in Yuan Tingshan's ear, "In reality, no matter if you are a general in Ji province or going to Guangling province to lead troops to quell a rebellion, in someone's heart, you are not worthy of his trust. Only when your father-in-law is dead will you have the chance to rise up. These words are this king's return gift to you." Yuan Tingshan's body trembled. Zhao Xiong seemed to be slightly tired. He waved his hand and said, "You can go. This king won't send you off." Yuan Tingshan continued to bend his back and took a few steps back before turning and leaving. Zhao Xiong looked at that back and said with a smile, "You're looking down on my third brother too much." "Yes, you're also looking down on me, Zhao Xiong." "Fine, I'll help you this time." Jiangnan Yangzhou had a scenic spot called the Scattered Flower Terrace. The mountain was not high, but there were no mountains within 100 miles, making it stand out. It was said that in the Dafeng dynasty, there was an enlightened monk who preached here, causing fairies to scatter flowers and rocks to nod their heads. In the twilight, the famous people of Gangnam-do gathered their friends and gathered at the Scattered Flower Terrace to admire the moonlight. Everyone brought their own cushions, wine, tea, chopsticks, incense burners, rice, and other things. They lined up on the peak of the mountain. Tonight, there were 900 people on the mountain. Under the guidance of a famous person, they stood up and loudly recited, "My generation's writings are as high as the white snow." Close to 1,000 people sang the famous poem, A Journey to Jiangnan. For a moment, the sound was like thunder and the wine flowed like a spring. Late at night, the pure white moonlight shone on the scattered flower terrace. Chapter 1577. Among them was Lu Daolin, who had resigned from his post as the Minister of Rites a few years ago. He was the old master of the Lu family at Lake Pavilion. At the same time, he was the older brother of the former Minister of War, Lu Baijie. In a short 10 years, the Lu family had produced 2 ministers. It was indeed worthy of the former emperor's praise of, "The Lu family's children are a dazzling array of dazzling jewels." Although Lu Daolin had retired to the mountains and forests and Lu Baijie had quietly left the capital, it did not diminish the Lu family's transcendent status in Jiangnan that suppressed the other 3 families. There was also the old head of the Su family, Su Yinxing. After his eldest son, Su Gong, was conferred the title of Longxiang General, this old man peacefully lived out his remaining years. Although a few years ago, Su Shufei suffered an unexpected mishap and was banished to the Chongchun Palace, causing the entire Su family to suffer a great loss, fortunately Su Gong did not disappoint. He entered the capital to serve as the assistant minister of the Ministry of War and supported the family. Su Yinxing, who had previously closed his door and refused to receive guests, finally appeared. Sitting beside the old man was his youngest daughter, Su Huipeng. Dressed as a yellow-crowned Taoist nun, she and Tongshi Sword immortal Lu Baijie had a grudge that was not fated to be together. Everyone in the Jiangnan Taoist forest knew about it. The middle-aged Confucian scholar, Yuan Jiangyan, was not only the mainstay of the Yuan family, but also a famous talker. Beside the old man with the white cat on his lap sat a spirited young man. He lowered his head and bent his waist, gently waving the folding fan in his hand. However, he was not fanning his family's ancestor, but the lazy white cat. Behind the young man stood a green-robed swordsman who did not touch a drop of wine. When everyone was drunk, he was the only sober one. The 4 Gongnam-do families, the Lu family, the Yu family, the Yuan family, and the Gumusu family were the main forces in the south that contended against the scholars in the north. Once, the Green Party in Qingzhou was a natural ally of the 4 families. Unfortunately, they were not successful and were easily destroyed by the former Minister of War, Zhang Julu. Although the 4 surnames fought over every detail in the Jiangnan circuit, and generation after generation continuously fought both openly and covertly, in Great Peace City, in the imperial court of Liang, the 4 surnames were incomparably united. Su Gong was able to enter the capital from a local place and forcefully take down the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, the elderly head of the Yu family who raised a white cat, and Yu Zhenkong, who had not hesitated to personally make a trip to the capital, were all extremely important. Su Yinxing looked at Yu Zhenkong, who was a generation older than him, and sighed softly. "Elder Yu, chaos is everywhere now. Take Yuan Gua for example. He finally made a comeback and became the Minister of Revenue in charge of money, but in just a few days, he was sent to Guangling Circuit next door to us to be a provincial governor. Because it is under the jurisdiction of a vassal king, he is only a deputy. If it weren't for the Grand Chancellor and Tantanon speaking up for Tang Shi and suppressing it, it probably wouldn't have been Kai Nan but Tang Shi who would have been the provincial governor of Lianhuai. Elder Yu, although Tang Shi is still the Minister of War, His Majesty has clearly moved his mind to change the position. In Elder Yu's opinion, where should Tang Shi go from here? We also have a target and can plan for the long term." Yu Zhenkong smiled and pointed at Lu Daolin. "The minister's brother is not in a hurry, so why are you, Su Yinxing, in a hurry?" Lu Daolin said helplessly, "It's not that I'm not in a hurry, it's that there's no use in being in a hurry. Fortunately, Kai Nan has already gone to Lianhuai Circuit and Yuan Gua has gone to Guangling Circuit. As long as Tang Shi isn't sent to Nanjiang, she probably won't be doing too badly." Yu Zhenkong stroked the white cat's head and said calmly, "In the past, there was a battle between civil and military officials from the capital to the ground. Now, both sides have become a thing of the past. Next will be the battle between North and South. Grand Chancellor Qi of Zhongshu Province is a classic southerner. Deputy Zhao Yuling is a southerner. Tantanon is a northerner. Chen Wang is a Bailiang. They have fought to a draw. Let's count the 6 ministries of the Minister of State. The new Minister of Appointments, Yin Mao Chun, is a southerner. The 2 successive Ministers of Revenue, Wang Xiongui, and Yuan Gua are all Southerners. If we add in Lu Daolin, the former Minister of Rights, and Lu Baijie, the current Minister of War, don't you feel that there are too many of us Southern scholars at the front of the court? In this way, if Su Gong is allowed to take control of the Ministry of War and the former Assistant Minister of Justice, Han Lin, takes over as Minister of Justice, how will the Northern scholars survive in the future? Moreover, the number of scholars in recent years has been dominated by Southerners. Thus, Han Lin went to Jizhou and Yuan Gua went to Guangling Circuit. These are all reasonable matters. There is no need to make a fuss. In the future, even if Tang Taihuang becomes the Minister of War, Su Gong can only continue to be an assistant minister for another 4 or 5 years. There is nothing strange about it. Yu Zhenkong paused and smiled. What is interesting is that there is a new power in Taiyan City that cannot be underestimated. Grand Scholar Yan Jieshi, Left Chancellor Yao Baifeng of the Imperial College, Chen Wang of the Menxia Province, Assistant Minister of Rights Jean Lanting, Minister of Yellow Gate Yan Qiji, and the temporarily dormant Sun Yin are all from Bailiang without exception. However, they all have good reputations in the officialdom. There are not many of them, but each of their words carry a lot of weight, especially that Chen Wang. He is an extraordinary person. Even compared to Bai Yan's career back then, he is not inferior in any way. This is somewhat similar to the Green Party that interfered between Zhang Lu and Gu Lu. However, compared to the Green Party, this group of officials that can barely be called the Cold Party have never formed a party. Have you all noticed that although these people all come from Bailiang, their loyalty to His Majesty is something that none of the other civil and military officials in the imperial court can compare to? In the future, I am guessing that Chen Wang, whose future is limitless, will lead them and form a tripartite balance of power with us northern and southern scholars. Yuan Zhongyan sighed ruefully. Could it be another Bai Yan? Yu Zhenkong shook his head and said, I'm afraid it's more than that. Lu Daolin raised his head and gazed at the moonlit night, lost in thought. For some reason, Su Huipu's expression was rather sorrowful. Perhaps she was thinking of Sword Immortal Tang Shi who was far away in the capital. Or perhaps she was thinking of a certain woman surnamed Su who liked to wear red and was already separated by Yin and Yang. Yu Zhenkong smiled slightly and said, what our 4 families need to do now is take a step back. If Liaodong's Pang clan and the other northern families want to seize the seats in the capital at this time, we will pretend to be reluctant and give them all to them. As for when we will take a step forward, it's very simple. Wait until the Pang clan and the others are full of people. At the same time, we must wait until Chen Wang, Sun Yin, Fan Zhongho, and the others have truly matured before we act. Right now, let those northern barbarians and those young people have their own conflicts. They might be able to make things difficult for those juniors in the next few years, but sooner or later, they will suffer greatly. In this period of time, you people should take a step back. It's not like you really don't care about anything. You might as well add flowers to the brocade for those young people of Great Peace City who have a bright future. Help them make a name for themselves in the literary world, boost their reputation, and occasionally sing poems. Treat it as sowing good karma. Yuan Zhongyan laughed and said, what's so hard about that? Then Yu Zhenkong did a strange action. He raised his wine cup, turned to face the northwest, and toasted from a distance. I, Yu Zhenkong, represent the Central Plains in toasting your Bailiang. Toasting you and your father. Chapter 1578. Since the end of the Yonghui era, the yamen of the 3 provinces and 6 ministries of Liang, big and small, had changed drastically. Senior officials such as Zhang Julu, Minister of War Gu Zhentang, and this old man of the Song family had either died or left the center of the capital. A group of people led by the head of the secretariat, Qi Yonglong, had ascended to high positions in the imperial court. Among them, there were seniors like Chen Wang, the left scattered cavalry of Menxia province, as well as young scholars like Li Jifu, Wu Congxian, and Gao Tingshu, who had become famous in the Xiangfu Yuanyan imperial examination, whose qualifications were far inferior to Chen Xiaobao's. Tang Taihuang and Su Gong had also become assistant ministers. Among the old officials of the cabinet, there were also a lot of changes. A large number of Yonghui officials, including Zhao Yuling and Yin Mao Chun, had almost all changed their official positions. Yuan Gua, Han Lin, and Wang Xiongui had all been transferred to other places and became nominal border officials. Among them, only Huan Wan was an anomaly. As an old official of 3 dynasties, no matter how the officials of the same dynasty changed, Tantanon had always been in charge of Menxia province. Although it was rumored that he was not feeling well and had to make room for the second-in-command of the Secretariat, Zhao Yuling, or Yin Mao Chun, the heavenly official of the Ministry of Personnel, to the civil and military officials of Great Peace City, as long as His Majesty did not give an explicit order, Tantanon was still the dominant figure who had great influence on the entire imperial court. Even if Huan Wen really retired, as the only remaining senior official and literary leader of the Liang dynasty, the political affairs of Liang would inevitably be handled by this old man who was praised as the national treasure by the late emperor. No wonder the Huan family in Great Peace City would tease them out of kindness. As autumn approached this year, the emperor asked the imperial household department to carefully craft more than 40 ink slabs with auspicious talisman engraved on them and gave them to the important officials. Those who received them all thought that they were treasures. Only Huan Wen received 3 slabs. Even Qi Yonglong, Yan Jeshi, and Chen Wang only received 2 slabs. Moreover, not only did Huan Wen receive this honor, but he also received an old ginseng that could be said to be the best among all the tributes in Liaodong and a jar of Chunling wine. As a result, the private discussions that speculated that Tantanon might not be able to survive the second year of the auspicious talisman vanished in an instant. Following the rise of the 2 provinces under the Hall of Secretaries and the relocation of the Hanlin Academy to a new location, as well as the establishment of the 6 pavilions, a large number of important civil officials were sent out. The Zhao family, which was originally a gathering of yamen offices, lived up to the grand occasion of all the officials of the imperial court gathered here in the early years. On the first day of autumn, the emperor specially opened the Golden Autumn Garden, which occupied the largest area and had the best scenery among the 4 imperial gardens, and held a grand banquet for all the officials. Before the banquet began, the young emperor, who was quite interested, even set a new rule for Liang to welcome autumn. He had the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate, Song Tonglu, bring in a pot of Chinese parasol tree that had been planted long ago. When the time came, he had Chen Wang temporarily act as the grand historian and loudly shout, "Autumn is coming." Then, the emperor personally plucked a piece of Chinese parasol tree leaf, implying that the emperor represented the common people in reporting to the heavens for autumn. In this impromptu and elegant matter that had no precedent, Chen Wang, who became the first reporting to the emperor to welcome autumn, of Liang, was undoubtedly the most eye-catching. Empress Yen Dongwu stood together with her younger brother Yen Qiji. After seeing this scene, this moving woman, who was the mother of the nation, said softly to her younger brother, "You must strive to become the person to report to the emperor for autumn next year." Yen Qiji, who was most afraid of being in the limelight, said with a headache, "Sister, what is there to fight about this kind of thing? Besides, I can't fight for it." With Chen Xiaobao in front, next year, probably only the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Jean Lanting, or the new chancellor of our Hanlin Academy can take on this role. Otherwise, Song Kelly, Fan Zhongho, and the others would be more justified than me. Yen Dongwu glanced at the civil and military officials with different expressions. The older ones, like Qi Yonglong and Huan Wen, were, after all, old and had reached the top of the court. There was no need for them to add flowers to the brocade. Therefore, they all had an indifferent attitude towards this matter and did not want to fight with the younger generation. However, the younger generation of officials, such as Zhao Yuling and Yin Mao Chun, were slightly different. They also did not need to fight for anything and were not suitable. However, when they looked at Chen Wang, who was a generation lower in seniority, there was still a hint of envy in their eyes. As for Gao Tingshu, Wu Tsongxian, and the other young people who had just made a name for themselves in the court of Liang, all of them had burning gazes. These years, Jean Lanting, who had been successful in Great Peace City, was unperturbed. It seemed that he already saw the person to report to the emperor for autumn next year as something in the bag. Yen Dongwu, who now had the bearing of a phoenix, did not look sideways. She did not whisper to her beloved younger brother and said with an indifferent expression, "Your brother-in-law needs you to fight for it. However, he will not say anything to you directly. However, if you have the heart to improve, he will be very happy." Yen Qiji sighed helplessly and said, "All right, then I will do my best." Yen Dongwu looked out of the corner of his eye at his father, Yen Jeshi, who was chatting happily with Wen Shorin, the Grand Secretary of the Hall of Martial Meritocracy, and the other court officials. He changed to an unquestionable tone and said, "Our father has already helped you pave the way. The 6 Grand Secretaries of the Hall of Martial Meritocracy, plus the 6 newly established Grand Secretaries of the Hall of Martial Meritocracy, these 12 people will be the most noble court officials of our dynasty in the future. You are still young and do not have enough experience. You do not have the extravagant hope that our Yen family will have 2 grand secretaries, but it will not be difficult for you to become a grand secretary of the Hall of Martial Meritocracy in 10 to 20 years. Moreover, grand secretaries of the Hall of Martial Meritocracy are an empty title, and will not be taken away just because an official leaves the court. In addition, in a few years, if nothing unexpected happens, Father will be promoted from the Hall of Martial Meritocracy to the Hall of Martial Meritocracy. Yen Chiji said timidly, Sister, in the end, we are relatives. Shouldn't we avoid arousing suspicion? Yen Dongwu turned his head expressionlessly, but there was clearly some anger in his eyes. He directly interrupted his brother's words and said in a low voice, Can you really not see the undercurrent in the court? Even you, the brother-in-law, are not helping your brother-in-law. Do you want to place your hopes on those civil officials who are becoming better and better at being officials? Yen Chiji wanted to speak but stopped. In the end, he lowered his head and admitted his mistake. The emperor walked over to the side of the brother and sister. Seeing Yen Chiji's embarrassed state, he smiled and joked, What is it, brother-in-law? Were you scolded by your sister again? Every time Grand Secretary Yen sees me and occasionally mentions you, his son, it is always difficult to hide his proud smile. Your sister, on the other hand, scolds him every time she sees him. I can't help but feel indignant for you. No matter, no matter. Since your sister is not close to you, I am very close to you, the brother-in-law. In the future, if you are wronged by your sister, feel free to come and complain to me. We can drink together to relieve our boredom. Yen Dongwu smiled gently and asked, What troubles does your majesty have to relieve? The young emperor, who had been caught red-handed, was immediately speechless. This made Yen Chiji, who was watching the fire from the other side, feel even more amused. The Emperor Zhao Zhuan reached out and pointed at his brother-in-law, who was rejoicing in his misfortune. Ungrateful. I accidentally got into trouble because I wanted to help you. If a normal subject heard the words ungrateful from the mouth of an emperor, they would probably be scared out of their wits. It was unknown if Yen Chiji was too slow or what, but he was not nervous at all and smiled apologetically. Although the young emperor snorted coldly on the surface, in the depths of his heart, he was not angry at his brother-in-law's arrogance. Instead, he felt very comfortable. If they were not family, they would not be so casual. Although the emperors of the previous dynasties called themselves emperors. Which emperor really liked the feeling of being alone? Yen Dongwu suddenly said in a low voice, Your Majesty, the matter of the palace serving girls cannot be delayed any longer. Zhao Zhuan quickly laughed and then found an excuse to go find the head of the secretariat to discuss military matters. Chapter 1579. After the banquet, the emperor allowed the officials to tour the Golden Autumn Garden on their own. Thus, the civil and military officials spread out in groups of 2s and 3s. They seemed to be careless, but there were many things to pay attention to. For example, Qi Yonglong and Huan Wen, the 2 big shots of the court, walked side by side. Zhao Yuling of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, who had resigned from the Ministry of Personnel, pulled 5 or 6 officials with him. The current heavenly official, Yin Mao Chun, chatted happily with the group of Hanlin Academy scholars. A few newly appointed scholars with shaky foundations naturally walked hand in hand. After the death of the blue-eyed girl, the 6 officials of the Shangshu province, who had been leaderless, also had their own positions and did not stick together. Zhao Shixuan, on the other hand, stuck together. The assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Tang Taizhuang, walked with 2 great generals of the same generation as his benefactor, Gu Jiantang. One of them was the great general Zhao Cheng, who had not paid attention to worldly affairs for many years, and the other was Yang Shenxing, whose face had been covered in dirt for the past 2 years. On the other hand, the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Liu Baijia, walked with the young officials from Jiangnan. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Wen Taiyi, and the former general of Qingzhou, Hong Lingshu, who had recently been summoned to the capital, had just made it clear that they would not interact with each other for the rest of their lives. Today they met again. It looked like they had buried the hatchet and were on good terms with each other. It was hard not to wonder if the Green faction was going to make a comeback. As for the 2 Liao families in the north, led by the Pang and Lu families, the people in charge of the Great Peace City also stayed together. Qi Yonglong and Huan Wen, these 2 old men, did not walk slowly. Their steps were large, so they walked further and further away from the group of officials behind them. The 2 old men came directly to a famous spot in the Golden Autumn Garden. It was the Spring God Mountain built from nearly 100 pieces of Spring God Lake stone. Although the Spring God Lake stone had long been loved and revered by some famous scholars of Jiangnan, it was only in the past 5 years that it had truly become popular and known to all levels of society. Piece by piece, the stone was continuously picked up from the bottom of the lake. Last year, it even flew into the royal family and became a mountain overnight in the Golden Autumn Garden, becoming famous under heaven. The Spring God Lake stone was known to be thin and wrinkled. It was a high-quality Spring God Lake stone, was exquisite and had a natural aura. So it was said to be one gene of 1 or 2 tails of gold. Huanwen did not climb the mountain. Instead, he stood a few dozen steps away from the Spring God Lake mountain and gazed at the short mountain that was said to be shrouded in mist. The sound of rain could be heard on rainy days, and the sound of conches could be heard in strong winds. Seeing that Tantanon had no intention of climbing the mountain, the head of the secretariat, Qi Yonglong, smiled and accompanied Tantanon where he stood. The atmosphere in Liang Imperial Court was very relaxed. Compared to the confrontation between Zhang and Gu, when Zhang Julu and Gu Jiantang, these two serious civil and military leaders, were present, the civil and military officials could be said to be trembling with fear of making mistakes. Now that it was the good-tempered Qi Yonglong and Huan Wen, everyone was much more relaxed. In addition, they had coincidentally met Zhao Zhuan, a young emperor who had just ascended the throne and could not be considered to have accumulated great power. Therefore, the senior officials of Great Peace City liked to tease the younger generation that they were on good terms with. Compared to them, the old officials of Yonghui, they had met at a good time. Tantanon, who had drunk a lot at the banquet, burped. He turned to Qi Yonglong and asked with a smile, "Head of the Secretariat, do you know the origin of my nickname, Huanwen, Tantanon?" Qi Yonglong smiled and shook his head. Huanwen laughed and said, "In the beginning, I wasn't called Tantanon. There was a guy who gave me the nickname of Wine Gourd. If I angered him, he would scold me as a wine bag and a good-for-nothing. The name Tantanon was something that happened much later. There was one time when I was on duty with that guy in the forbidden area. I couldn't control my mouth and secretly drank some wine. It just so happened that I was caught red-handed by the previous emperor, who had been reading books all night. I drank too much and spoke without restraint. I told the previous emperor that as long as I, Huan Wen, had wine in my stomach, I would be magnanimous. However, if there was a day when His Majesty did not give me wine to drink, I would be full of complaints. The previous emperor was amused and immediately had the head eunuch, Han Shengxian, bring over several jars of wine. At that time, there was a guy who had never touched wine who drank a cup for the first time. His face was as red as a monkey's butt. After I was drunk, I laughed at him and told him not to call himself Green Eyes, just Red Face. He replied, "Shut your mouth and be a good Tantanon." It was probably from that time onwards that I became the Tantanweng. Perhaps many officials felt that this nickname meant that I, Huan Wen, was a tumbler in Liang's officialdom. No matter how turbulent the court was, I would always sway along with it, but in the end, I never fell. Qi Yonglong sighed and said, "Whether as a person or an official, Tantanon has never done anything that his heart could not get over. I'm not as good as Tantanon." Huan Wen rolled his eyes and said, "Head of the Secretariat, your words are too much of a bootlicker. If it were someone else who said it, I would even think that they were scolding him." Qi Yonglong smiled but did not say anything. He was in charge of the Secretariat of the Liang dynasty, which had been neglected for many years. A few decades ago, the Zhao clan of the old Liang dynasty, which was located in the northern lands and was divided by the vassal towns, had bestowed the titles of head of the Secretariat, left and right servant archers, and Shizhong to the vassal towns' military generals who were too powerful to get rid of and the valiant military officials who controlled the court to show their favor. They were all empty titles, just like the Great Pillar State and the Great Pillar State later. However, today was different from the past. The Secretariat of the Secretariat, which had lost a lot of power, became a veritable important place of the court again. Qi Yonglong also took the opportunity to become the next Grand Secretary after Zhang Julu. Some of the power that had been taken away by the Hanlin Academy long ago also returned to the Secretariat of the Secretariat. However, Qi Yonglong was well aware that as the head of the Secretariat, who was summoned to the capital to put out the fire, in the end, he was just a transitional prime minister. After helping Yin Mao Chun, Zhao Yuling, and the others to ascend to the throne, he had to retreat unscathed. However, Huan Wen was different. Whether it was the former emperor or the current emperor, they all regarded this Tantanon, who had a good personal relationship with Zhang Julu, as a trustworthy teacher of the emperor. Qi Yonglong was very clear about the hubbub of Huan Wen's resignation this time. It was not that the young emperor was afraid of Huan Wen, but that Huan Wen himself had the intention to retire. That was why there was such a beautiful story that Huan Wen alone received 3 imperial inkstones. Huan Wen said softly, "Young people should be busy. When they are busy, they can shake off the floating air. Old people should be idle. Only when they are idle can they enjoy the rest of their lives." Qi Yonglong shook his head and said in a low voice, "At this time, everyone in the court can be idle except for Tantanon. The Guangling Road, the Bailiang Road, and the Liangliao Road are all not peaceful. The court needs Tantanon to help make decisions. Many times and many things, even if Tantanon does not speak, as long as you sit there, even if you are dozing off, the hearts of the people in the court will not be in chaos. An old man in the family is like a treasure. This is exactly what Tantanon means." Huan Wen continued to look at the small mountain for a while, then slowly turned his head and smiled. "In terms of age and seniority, the head of the secretariat and my teacher are of the same generation." Qi Yonglong quickly waved his hand and said, "Don't give me that. Your teacher and I were famous for not getting along well in the past. As for the conflict between Confucianism and legalism, the two of us could never come to an agreement. After I came to the capital, I was already very lucky that Tantanon did not make things difficult for the Imperial College and the Secretariat." Huan Wen no longer used the head of the Secretariat's respectful and unfamiliar title. He said sincerely, "Although Mr. Qi does not have the same political views as my teacher admired your scholarly skills very much." In Huan Wen's opinion, the reason why people say that it is better to hide in plain clothes than to hide in official clothes is actually a hypocritical way of saying that either one has done enough as an official, or one can't be an official. It is far inferior to Mr. Qi, who can hide in plain clothes and help the world. Qi Yonglong smiled. "Tantanon, oh Tantanon, it is one thing for us 2 old men to flatter each other here, but the problem is that no one is listening to us. How can we pass on, and leave our names in history?" Speaking of this, Qi Yonglong said with a hint of sarcasm, "When I was young and studied history, when I first read about someone or something, I always felt that my blood was boiling or moved. Later, when I thought about it, I realized that it was an extreme case of fishing for fame. Their intentions are punishable." Huan Wen laughed heartily. "Mr. Qi, you are right. I also had the same feeling when I was young." Qi Yonglong sighed for no reason. The writer of the past, the flipper of the future. Huan Wen also sighed and suddenly asked, "Mr. Qi, have you never met that Su Fengnian?" Qi Yonglong nodded. "That king of Bailiang has been to Shangyin Academy, but unfortunately, I have never met him." Huan Wen laughed and said, "My teacher and the old King Liang have scolded each other many times. As a student, although I have only met the young king twice, the feeling is really not enough for outsiders to know." Qi Yonglong said in a bad mood, "What's there to show off?" Huan Wen smiled happily and hard, not hiding his mischievous meaning. Huan Wen asked again, "Mr. Qi, do you know the 2 things I like to do the most since I became an official in the capital?" Qi Yonglong replied, "I'd like to hear the details." Tantanon narrowed his eyes. First, he raised his left arm and waved his sleeve. Then, he stretched out his right hand and gently tapped in the air with his index and middle fingers together. "Every day in the court, I watch civil and military officials come and go, dazzling and dazzling. I listen to the jade pendants on their waists tapping, tinkling, tinkling, crisp and pleasant to the ear. I'll never get tired of watching and listening." Qi Yonglong laughed and said, "I didn't feel it before, but I have to pay attention to it in the future." Huan Wen raised his head, not looking at the mountain, but at the higher sky. "Heaven and earth are like a big jade plate. Large and small beads fall into it, crackling and shattering. They all die." Qi Yonglong closed his eyes and tilted his head slightly, as if listening attentively. He murmured, "Yes, the most brilliant bead in the world in the northwest is finally about to shatter. You and me, and those yellow and purple high lords behind us, are the culprits." Huan Wen laughed and said, "We are the scholars who are ashamed of the classics." Qi Yonglong still closed his eyes and laughed softly. It turns out that the real scholars don't read books. Chapter 1580. The sudden fall of Huta City allowed the northern Mang army to unfold an extremely comfortable offensive posture at the southern end of the Dragon Eye Plain, leading to the emergency of Huayang Pass and Liuya and Fuling towns. At this critical moment, the deputy commander of the Northern Liang Infantry Army, great ancestor Gu, stood his ground against the opinion of the masses and did not disperse his troops to reinforce the front line. Instead, he gathered in the area of Zhongzhong military town behind Huaiyang Pass and urgently converged with the large border cavalry army led by the deputy commander of the cavalry army Zhou Kong. In this way, Huaiyang Pass and Liuya and Fuling towns, as the base of the northern Liang Protectorate Manor, imperceptibly replaced Huta City as the second Huta City. However, because Chu Lushan, the nominal number 1 commander of the northern Liang border army, insisted on personally guarding Huaiyang Pass, great ancestor Gu's action of not lending a helping hand pushed this foreign old general from the old southern Tang to the heart of the storm. Not only the cavalry generals, even the interior of the border army infantry system had a lot of complaints about great ancestor Gu. Especially after Chen Yunchue, who was also the deputy commander of the infantry army, temporarily led troops from Yuzhou to reinforce Liangzhou province. The 2 northern Liang infantry generals who had the same rank also had a lot of disagreements. In addition, Jean Partridge Zhou Kong himself was a typical aggressive commander in the northern Liang army. For a moment, great ancestor Gu was deserted in Zhongzhong military town, and great ancestor Gu, as the base of the northern Liang Protectorate Manor, imperceptibly became the second Huta city. However, because Chu Lushan, the nominal number 1 commander of the northern Liang border army, insisted on personally guarding Huaiyang Pass, great ancestor Gu's action of not lending a helping hand pushed this foreign old general from the old southern Tang to the heart of the storm. Within Grave 2 military town's temporary general manor discussion hall, another dispute that almost completely tore apart all pretenses erupted. Those officers and captains whose official positions weren't that high were already a bit numb. Right now, Grave Tomb and Huaiyang Pass defensive line behind Tiger Head City had already completely lost contact. Before this, there were already no less than 100 elite crossbowmen who died in battle while delivering military intelligence. In reality, Huaiyang Pass and Liuya Fuling towns could already be considered isolated outside the pass, submerged under Northern Mang Great Army's armored cavalry. In the meeting hall, there were originally more than 10 chairs. Great ancestor Gu, Zhou Kong, Chen Yunchue who came from afar, Qi Dangua, the commander of the 6,000 Iron-Footed Cavalry, Yuan Nanting, the commander of the White Scale Guards, and the others all had their own seats. However, the day before yesterday, Zhou Kong stood up angrily in front of great ancestor Gu, kicked a chair and left the meeting hall. Today, Zhou Kong and great ancestor Gu had an irreconcilable dispute about the location of Zhongzhong town. This cavalry general, who had the reputation of brocade partridge, stood on one side of the table with a sand table. He punched the table with his left hand and pointed at great ancestor Gu with his right hand. He said angrily, "Defend! Do you only know how to hide and defend? Is this all you can do, great ancestor Gu? I really don't know why His Highness invited you from the Central Plains to our Bailiang Frontier Army. If it wasn't for the fact that you wrote Collection of Ashes, and if it wasn't for the fact that the great general and Surly praised you endlessly back then, this general would have suspected that you were a spy for the northern Mang barbarians." Hearing this, not to mention the young generals like Ning Mei, the deputy general of the Iron-Footed Cavalry, who could only be regarded as a rising star compared to the old generals, even the silent Chen Yunchue's eyelids trembled. Zhou Kang's words were obviously too much. Chen Yunchue glanced at great ancestor Gu from the corner of his eyes. Great ancestor Gu was still indifferent. However, Zhou Kong didn't show any sign of mercy. He pointed his finger at great ancestor Gu even more fiercely. Huaiyang Pass can't be defended if you can't even defend Huta Town? Liuya and Fuling Town rely on the flexibility of the cavalry to actively seek opportunities. Can they defend it? Great ancestor Gu, you are the commander of the infantry, but I am the deputy commander of the Bailiang cavalry. I can't bear to see the tens of thousands of cavalry in Liuya and Fuling Town have to dismount and fight on foot because of your opinion. In the end, they can only die on the city wall. I can't bear to see the tens of thousands of cavalry under my command crowding around the heavy tomb every day, watching their comrades die in the front line every day, but they can't fight. In the end, Zhou Kang's eyes were almost burning with anger. He reprimanded, "Great ancestor Gu, it's fine if you are afraid of death. I don't care if your infantry likes to be cowards. But why do you want our cavalry to wait for death here?" Great ancestor Gu said indifferently, "Because without the support of Commander Zhou's cavalry, the heavy tomb can't be defended. The city is dead. Without the restraint of the cavalry, there is no city in the world that can't be broken. Similarly, without the cooperation of a stable city, the cavalry is like water without a source. It's not hard to win a few battles, but it's unrealistic to win the entire battle. Zhou Kong sneered. Then your infantry should just obediently wait in the heavy tomb. It's enough as long as you cooperate with our cavalry and watch us kill the enemy. This request isn't too much, is it? Right now, Dongzhu's army has yet to truly gain a foothold, but our cavalry can roam through our own defensive line with our eyes closed. Not to mention charging and attacking, even if it's a night battle, we can fight cleanly and efficiently. The disadvantage in numbers can be made up for by our familiarity with the geography. Great Ancestor Gu, you keep saying that you want to wait for news from the two battlefields of Qingsong City and Xiaoguang City in Yuzhou, and that it's best to delay until the new city on the border of Liangzhou is built. But for better or for worse, you are someone who has led troops in battle. How can you not know the principle of fleeting opportunities on the battlefield? What, you can't be thinking that after Protector General Chu dies at Huaiyang Pass, you can go to that new city and become the next Protector General, right? Great Ancestor Gu's expression did not change. He only stared at this Bailiang's third-in-command who spoke without thinking. He slowly said, Zhou Kong, there is no joking in the army. There are some words that I can tolerate, but there are some words that can't be treated as a fart. Zhou Kong narrowed his eyes and laughed sinisterly. You finally can't tolerate it anymore? There are 30,000 Bailiang's right army outside the city. Do you still dare to kill me in the heavy tomb? Then, Zhou Kong laughed and pretended to look around. In the romance novels, there's an interesting joke about throwing a cup as a signal. It's said that as long as a wine cup is thrown, several hundred executioners will rush out and chop the person into mincemeat. It's just that you, Great Ancestor Gu, don't have a wine cup in your hands. These generals and lieutenants in the room don't seem to listen to your orders, do they? Great Ancestor Gu smiled. You and I both know that in the military town of Heavy Tomb, you, Commander Zhou, put me under house arrest. Now, all the generals here more or less don't like me. The veteran General Chen Yunchue, who was afraid of adding fuel to the fire, sighed. How did things come to this point? It would be good if Chu Lushan was here. Otherwise, Yan Wenluan or Yuan Zuozong would be fine too. This was the result of a group of dragons without a leader. If they were not facing a major event that could affect the trend of Bailiang and even the entire world, Great Ancestor Gu, Zhou Kong, and even the young Bailiang military talents like Ning Amei of Qidong could take charge alone and decide the outcome of a state war. They would not have such a headache. Thinking of this, Chen Yunchue suddenly felt sad. He remembered the military years when he was young. At that time, there were so many fierce generals and strategists gathered together. Li Yishan, Zhao Chongling, Yan Wenluan, Wu Yong, Su Pu, Wei Taizhan, Lu Yuanji, Zhong Honggu, Chen Jibao, Yuan Zuozong, Chu Lushan. But at that time, there would be someone who would make the final decision. There would never be such an unfamiliar situation that was close to internal strife. Unfortunately, the prince had to go to Liuzhou in person to put out the fire. And Chu Lushan, the #1 person of the border army who guarded Huaiyang Pass, for some reason, did not make any decisions about the complicated military affairs of Heavy Tomb behind him. Chen Yunchue knew that if he did not act as a peacemaker, there might be a big fight in the conference hall today. While Chen Yunchue was more inclined towards Zhou Kong taking the initiative to attack, Great Ancestor Gu was the leading figure of the infantry in Liangzhou. Chen Yunchue could not help but feel some sympathy towards Jean Partridge's unbridled humiliation and suppression. In the end, this was not a conflict between Zhou and Gu, but a natural conflict between Bailiang cavalry and infantry. Even Yan Wenluan could not change this conflict. Bailiang had more infantry, but in the war with Bei Mang, the main characters were always the cavalry. In the end, it was also the cavalry that decided victory. Just like when Bailiang was changing between the old and the new, the Longxiang army and the Great Snow Dragon cavalry had each attacked Bei Mang and shone brilliantly. Later on, in Yuzhou, which was known as the main camp of Bailiang infantry, it was the 10,000-strong cavalry led by the young General Yu Luandao that shook the world. Chen Yunchue took a few steps closer to the table and pressed his hands lightly on the table. He said softly, "The situation in Liangzhou is not good. Liuzhou is the same. Even Wang Yi has to go there personally to face Lu Gui's army. Maybe he will also face that Tuoba Bodhisattva. Let's not make trouble for Wang Yi. If you have something to say, say it. If you are angry, don't say it." Chapter 1581. Chen Yunchue paused for a moment and glanced at Zhou Kong and Great Ancestor Gu, who were standing opposite each other. Everyone, Allow me to remind you that this is the Border Military Conference Hall, which is second only to the Northern Liang Protectorate. This is not the Liang Temple where civil officials talk and military officials run errands. We are also not those civil officials who stay out of the affairs and glorify themselves as strategists. You and I are both leading troops to war. Perhaps someone will personally go to the battlefield tomorrow. Perhaps today will be the last time I, Chen Yunchue, will see you. I believe in General Gu's cautiousness, and I also believe in General Zhou's decisiveness. Whether the heavy tomb cavalry will fight or defend, from the looks of it, there are pros and cons. General Gu and General Zhou have already discussed a lot. Right now we can't get in touch with Huayang Pass. Commander Yuan is not in Liangzhou, and Prince has also gone to Liuzhou where the situation is urgent. Can we attack and defend at the same time? For example, if General Gu thinks that General Zhou's 30,000 left cavalry, General Qi's 6,000 iron stupas and General Yuan's white feather guards are too radical, then... Great Ancestor Gu hesitated for a second and said firmly, Commander Chen, to be honest, we not only have to defend the heavy tomb cavalry, but also have to leave enough cavalry for Beiliang. This is not a question of radical or conservative, but we can't fight this battle in the first place. At the very least, even if the heavy tomb cavalry can kill more than 100,000 enemies, even if we lose more than 30,000 of our own, the left cavalry can't form an absolute fighting force within a year. In that case, Beiliang has already lost. What's more, facing Dongzhu's well-prepared cavalry and Dongzhu's well-prepared left cavalry and General Qi's and General Yuan's two elite cavalry armies, can we really guarantee a complete victory without any losses? Great Ancestor Gu picked up the special bamboo pole and drew a big circle south of the heavy tomb cavalry and north of the border of Liangzhou. Why is he Zhonghu's 40,000 right cavalry still not moving? He didn't hear the bad news about Huta City, so he went north to the heavy tomb cavalry? The reason is very simple. Whether or not the new city, which cost half of Northern Liang's resources, can be successfully built will determine whether or not Northern Liang can once again fight outside the pass. Under this premise, Huayang Pass can be lost, and even the grave that we are in can be lost. However, before we break through the city, we must do our best to stop Northern Mang's army to the north of the new city. The longer, the better. It doesn't matter how many enemies our Beiliang frontier army kills during this period of time. It doesn't matter if Commander Chu, Great Ancestor Gu, Chen Yun, or Zhou Kong. Great Ancestor Gu smiled bitterly and said, Dongzhu can't wait for us to take the initiative to fight him and exchange forces with him. As the king of the South Courtyard, he is very happy. To put it bluntly, the Beimang barbarians in Xijing and Norland only care about how many Beiliang frontier army Dongzhua has killed, but they don't care too much about how many Beimang soldiers have died. Look at the Hulu Pass on the Eastern Front. That young general called Zhong Tan has killed many Beimang siege troops. No matter how many people have died, as long as he breached Wugong City and Wanhe City, he will be promoted by Old Lady Murong and become the new Beimang, Xia Jumo. I don't mind asserting that as long as the left cavalry is mobilized, even if more than 10,000 people are killed in battle, the throne of the king of the South Courtyard under Dongzhua's but will be stabilized for another half a year. Great Ancestor Gu lowered his head and looked at the sand table as he said in a hoarse voice, I know, except for me, everyone else in the room thinks that Heavy Tomb has let down the Beiliang frontier army, Huda City and Lu Jinu since they chose to avoid the battle despite having so many soldiers. At this moment, a slightly indifferent voice sounded from the gate of the conference hall. Enough! Not only Great Ancestor Gu raised his head abruptly, but all the generals including Zhou Kong and Chen Yunchue also turned their heads to look at that slender figure. The young man looked travel-worn, but he made people feel very reassured. This person was Su Fengnian, who came to Heavy Tomb military town from Courtyard Pasture alone. In order to arrive at Huayang Pass as soon as possible and bring more soldiers to Liuzhou province for Shifu, the general of Liangzhou province who had regained his power, Su Fengnian didn't even take a white horse attendant with him. Su Fengnian, one of the 4 grandmasters, had an ugly look on his face. However, what really made Su Fengnian angry was the storm in the conference hall. Qi Jiajia's sword Qi, which had been suppressed, had been stirred up again. Huta City in Liangzhou province had fallen, Lu Jinu had died in battle, and Liuzhou province was very likely to be completely annihilated by the Longxiang army. It was hard to say whether Yang Yuanzhan's army in Yuzhou province could be completely surrounded by Yang Yuanzhan's army. The new city on the border of Liangzhou province had not been built yet, and there were no huge cities to rely on and no reliable passes in Liangzhou province. However, Su Fengnian, who was one of the mainstays of Liangzhou province's cavalry, was suddenly critically ill, and Su Fengnian couldn't join the battle for the time being. It could be imagined how bad Su Fengnian's mood was at this moment. However, the young lord who strode into the conference hall still tried his best to restrain himself. Even so, Su Fengnian didn't show any intention of denouncing anyone. Even Zhou Kong, the fearless deputy general of cavalry, lost his arrogance and felt a little guilty for the first time. Su Fengnian gently exhaled. After a moment of silence, he slowly opened his mouth. I also want to go to Qingcang City in Liuzhou province and beat Tuoba Bodhisattva to death. It would be best if I could kill Lu Gui as well. However, I can't do that now. Moreover, Liangzhou province is more important than Liuzhou province. Therefore I could only come here without stopping. Then I stood outside the door and listened to your quarrel for about 15 minutes. It's a pity that I didn't get to see Commander Gu and Commander Zhou fight. It's a pity. Embarrassed, Zhou Kong coughed a few times. When some of the young captains saw this scene, they tried their best to hold back their laughter, but it was difficult for them to do so. Su Fengnian did not continue to dig at the old generals. He walked to the north of the table and faced the south. The generals of the left and right factions naturally held their breaths and stood solemnly. Su Fengnian said, "Subduing the enemy without fighting is the specialty of the civil officials. We Bailiang don't like this. If the Baimang barbarians want to go south, then we will fight and win. We will beat them until they can't even return to Baimang. Fighting and winning has always been the self-confidence of our Bailiang, or perhaps the Su family's iron cavalry. It's not arrogance." However, even Su Xiao has never felt that a smooth victory is worth being happy about. Which battle was the battle that established our Bailiang frontier army as the #1 army in the Spring and Autumn War? It was Su Xiao who told me personally that it was the Battle of the Western Rampart that was the most bitter, the most tragic, and the most casualties. There were many times when he couldn't even see hope and almost wanted to give up. Now, our Bailiang will face the second battle of the Western Rampart. Su Xiao is no longer here. Li Yishan, Zhao Chongling, Chen Jibao, Wu Qi, Su Pu, Zhong Honggu, and others have either left or died. But now by my side, there are you, Chen Yunchui, Zhou Kong, Yuan Nanting, Qi Dangua, Ningamei, and great ancestor Gu who just entered Bailiang. To the north, there are Chu Lushan at Huayang Pass. To the east, there are Yan Wenluan's infantry and Yul Wandao's cavalry in Yuzhou. There are also Hu Kuei and Huang Fujin. In the mouth of the gorge, there are 2 heavy cavalry troops led by Yuan Zuozong. To the west, there are Su Longxiang, Li Mofen, and Wang Lingbao's Longxiang army, and Yang Guangdou and Chen Shiliang's Liuzhou provincial governor's office. To the south there are even more. Not to mention Bailiang's local civil and military officials, there are even thousands of foreign scholars. The retired Wei Taizhan, Lu Yuanji, and the others, including the old soldier Lin Dofang, have all made it clear that they want to come back and return to the Bailiang frontier army. Su Fengnian suddenly smiled and said, "Whether there will be such a story about Bailiang fighting against a country in the history books in the future is the civil and military officials of Liang. It's none of our business. They can write whatever they want. But at least I think that after a few years, everyone here should strive to survive and tell their descendants and juniors about their military life. It's always good. Probably just like what Su Xiao nagged me about all those years ago. If by any chance someone here were to die in battle, he wouldn't have the fortune to show off to the young people." At this point, Su Fengnian looked at Zhou Kong. "For example, if you, Zhou Kong, were to die in battle, I believe that in the future, there would be an old man surnamed Gu. If he met a young man surnamed Zhou, he might sit down and casually chat for a bit. While drinking wine, he would say that old man Zhou Kong from your family back then. His words were always unpleasant, but he was a hero who was willing to die for Bailiang." Su Fengnian's expression became absent-minded for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "If I were to die in battle and any of you survived, then please tell your descendants that Bailiang lost in a battle to the death, not without a fight." Chapter 1582. Unlike Liuya and Fuling, Zhongzhong military town, which was located behind Huayang Pass, was mostly guarded by infantry. However, compared to Huayang Pass, which had a natural barrier to rely on, Zhongzhong military town seemed to be less confident. In fact, on this line of defense, the general of Zhongzhong military town could not stand up straight when facing 3 colleagues of the same rank, and his voice was never loud. The 2 towns of Luya and Fuling had always been garrisoned with a considerable number of cavalry troops at the border. The two generals of the two towns were related to the two current deputy generals of the cavalry. Zhong Zhong was an awkward character that was neither loved nor loved by his grandmother. Although it belonged to the northern Liang cavalry, it had more infantrymen. However, it had nothing to do with great ancestor Gu and could not rely on anyone. When Huaiyang Pass became the location of the protectorate manor, Zhong, who was raised by his stepmother, became more and more inconspicuous. Su Fengnian lived in a courtyard that had just been cleaned up. The courtyard was not big, but it was elegant and quiet. It was not easy to find a courtyard like this in a military town that was filled with influential officials at the border of Liangzhou. After Su Fengnian lived in the courtyard, he sent a signal to Zhongzhong that was worth chewing. The young lord did not summon Zhou Kong, the partridge who had accompanied His Royal Highness to the capital with hundreds of old soldiers, nor did he summon great ancestor Gu, who he had found in the Jianghu of the Central Plains, nor did he summon great ancestor Qi Dangua, who was the adopted son of a general like Chu Lushan and Yuan Zuozong. Instead, he called Ning Mei, who was from the Phoenix Battalion, to drink with him in the courtyard. The new deputy general of Iron Pagoda, Ning Mei, was still the interesting man with a rough appearance and a delicate voice. However, he was more restrained than before. After all, the young man sitting across from him was no longer His Royal Highness, who was looked down upon by the whole Beiliang. Su Fengnian clinked his cup with Ning Mei's and lamented, "Back then, General Ning took 100 men to accompany me to cause trouble in Jianghu. Many of them, including Hong Shuwen, are no longer in the Phoenix barracks. They have all become local military officers or even field officers. Yuan Meng, however, is still here. A few days ago at the courtyard ranch, he complained to me that he mentioned to you that he wanted to enter the Iron Stupa. However, not only did you not agree because of old friendship, you also scolded him." Ning Mei subconsciously sat up straight and said with the graceful voice of a woman from Dongyue, "The Phoenix Battalion has had many new faces in the past 2 years. I feel that with an old man like Captain Yuan in the battalion, I can be at ease." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Some of the young men who left the Phoenix Battalion under the identity of the White Horse Righteous faction would occasionally meet in private. I heard that they like to ask each other how high an official they have become, as well as how high an official they hope to become. They talk about who will become a border general or a border official in the future, and whether or not they can support each other. In this aspect, it is a bit like the Liang Imperial Court's fellow countrymen in the imperial examinations. Back in the day, our Beiliang's earliest border crossbowmen also went through such a phase. When they first met again, they were all talking about who had died on the battlefield. Moreover, they were all speaking in a very envious tone. After a few years or 10 years it was different. They were all asking how big the newly bought residence was, how beautiful the newly taken concubine was, and how many acres of high-quality farmland they had obtained." Seeing Ning Mei's expression change drastically, Su Fengnian waved his hand and smiled. "Don't be nervous. This is all human nature. Situations like the Phoenix battalions are rare for the time being. When the water is too clear, there will be no fish. I understand this principle." Besides, Su Xiao also said something similar. In his eyes, the world we live in now is too different from decades ago. At that time, almost everyone was thinking about how to survive. Everyone's head was tied to their waistbands. The only difference was that the commoners' heads were tied to straw ropes, while the scholars' heads were tied to the more valuable jade waistbands. In reality, everyone was in precarious situations. But now, everyone is thinking about how to live better. Therefore, since last year, families have all moved outside the borders of Beiliang. Since staying in Beiliang could lead to death, then they fled to a place where there was no smoke, a place where they couldn't hear the hooves of Beimang's horses. If Huainan doesn't work, then they can go to Gangnam-do. If Gangnam-do is also at war one day, then they can go south of the Guangling River. If that doesn't work, then they can go to Nanjiang. As long as they have money, they can escape all the way south. In the end they can survive." Su Fengnian's fingers twirled the white porcelain wine cup that didn't lose out to the exquisite ones used by the aristocratic families of Jiangnan. He raised it slightly. "I am one of the few extravagant people in the world. I know the market price of this small wine cup. In the rich places of the Central Plains, it probably sells for 2 or 3 taels of silver. After painstakingly moving to our Beiliang, the price will more than double. Of course, if we really want to talk about it, the valuable items in Mount Qingliang are innumerable. The scholars of the Central Plains say that Beiliang made millions poor, but one family rich. In fact, they aren't wrong. Just in Wutong'an alone, there are more than 300 precious calligraphy and paintings with the word fake on my handprint. However, compared to people like Zhong Hongguo, I, Su Fengnian, have long been known for being a prodigal son. I'm not quite the same as those misers. Chapter 1583. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "When I was young, Su Xiao would always bring priceless antiques to Wutong'an. He didn't understand what was so good about them, and he didn't understand how they could be sold for such a high price just by writing a few words or smearing some ink on them. He could only tell me that they were worth a lot of money, and then he would add how many Bailiang horses and how many Bailiang swords could be bought with them. In these years, I had Administrator Li Gongda, Lingzhou Provincial Governor Su Beiji, and Song Dongming help me secretly sell antiques, and paintings. I watched box after box of things being moved out of Mount Qingliang. General Ning, do you know what I was thinking?" Ning Mei shook his head with all his might. Su Fengnian joked, "I just wanted to complain to Su Xiao that you made a loss back then." Ning Mei laughed involuntarily. Su Fengnian restrained his smile. "Let's not talk about the distant past. Bai Yu had only been at Mount Qingliang for a few days, but he was already dissatisfied with Song Dongming. How could I let Zhou Kong and great ancestor Gu get along? One was one of the few Bailiang old soldiers who was willing to look up to me. The other was an outsider I invited with great difficulty. One was in the cavalry, the other was in the infantry. Today, it was wrong for me to speak up for either in the discussion hall. Family matters, national matters, and the world matters. Let's talk about family matters." Wang Linquan, who had vaguely become Bailiang's god of fortune, and Lu Dongjiang, who was depressed and unable to achieve his goals, were two fathers-in-law and two in-laws. Logically speaking, I should help the Lu family, who was not acclimatized. But can the Lu family really be supported? Among these, I just didn't want to delve too deeply into Wang Linquan's schemes against the Lu family's descendants. One was too shrewd, the other too stupid. They hit it off immediately. Ning Mei sighed, speechless. He didn't dare to say anything, nor did he know what he could say. Su Fengnian looked at Ning Mei and joked, "Do you think it's not easy for me to become the head of the household?" Ning Mei, whose thoughts had been seen through, nodded. Perhaps he was worried that he would be seen as a bootlicker, so he said in a deep voice, "This general really thinks so?" Su Fengnian said, "I'm just complaining, that's all. I can drink a little wine with you. It's actually very easy. The truly difficult ones are Lu Jinu and the others who carved their names on the stone steels on Mount Qingliang." Su Fengnian put down his wine cup. "But the ones who have it even harder are you, Ning Mei, Zhou Kong, and Grand Ancestor Gu. It's all of you." Su Fengnian exhaled heavily and stood up. "Maybe there are places like Bailiang in the whole of Liang. In this great world where everyone can live, some people are willing to die. But I'm sure there's no other place where so many people are willing to die together." Su Fengnian turned to look at Ning Mei. "I don't feel the slightest bit of heartache for the things in those chests to be sold to other high-ranking officials and dignitaries. Even if Mount Qingliang is emptied, and my Su family is left with nothing, it doesn't matter." Su Fengnian's mouth twitched. It was unclear whether it was because of the sword qi in his body or because of some other reason, but he seemed to be gnashing his teeth. He said fiercely, "But the real assets that Su Xiao left to me, such as the 300,000 steel cavalry, after I succeeded to the position of king of Bailiang, I would feel heartache if even one of them died. Another example is the morale of my Su family's army. I would feel guilty if even a fraction of it was lost in my hands." Ning Mei suddenly thought of a saying. "Those who think too much will tire their hearts. Those who think too much will suffer." Su Fengnian suddenly laughed and said softly, "Do you know what the old generals Wei Taizhan, Lu Yuanji, and Lu Yuanji were thinking when I passed by the right cavalry commander He Zhonghu's mansion and saw them visiting the sick? Among them, Lu Yuanji told me a few words from the bottom of his heart. The old man said that in a short 20 years, the young Lieutenant Zhong Hongguo, who would always lead the troops in a battle to the death, would become the Huaihua great general who held great power but only knew how to eliminate dissidents in the army. Lu Yuanji told me that we must cherish the Bailiang cavalry now. In another 20 or 30 years, we might not be able to see them again. Therefore, he and Wei Taizhan wanted to take advantage of the fact that they were still able to ride horses and raise their swords to die a quick death before they could see the Bailiang cavalry again." Ning Mei took a sip of wine and murmured softly, "Born in Bailiang and dying in Bailiang, how delightful." After muttering to himself, Ninga Mei, who paid great attention to details, carefully put down the wine cup in his hand. As if he felt that he had placed it in a wrong position, he even moved it a little. Only then did he stand up and ask, "Your Highness, I've always had a question in my heart, but I didn't dare to ask. Since I've drunk wine today, perhaps the wine has given me courage to ask?" Su Fengnian froze for a moment, then smiled and said, "Ask away." Ninga Mei grinned and asked, "I just want to know, if there comes a day when all 300,000 Bailiang cavalry are gone, will you regret it, Your Highness?" Su Fengnian said without hesitation, "Nonsense. I'll definitely regret it to death, to the extent that my intestines turn green." Ninga Mei scratched his head. There didn't seem to be any disappointment on his face. Instead, he chuckled and said, "As expected. Your Highness is good at doing business, but when it comes to buying people's hearts, you're still a lousy layman." Su Fengnian laughed loudly. Ninga Mei said seriously, "But I know that even if you know that you'll lose all 300,000 cavalry and have to start all over again, Your Highness will still make the same choice." Su Fengnian grunted in agreement. "I can also see that. In the past few years, my ability to buy people's hearts has been so, while General Ning's flattery has improved." Ninga Mei smiled calmly and said, "If old General Lu is right, dying on the spot is perfect." Chapter 1584. After Ninga Mei left the courtyard, Su Fengnian, who reeked of alcohol, was cleaning up the mess on the stone table. The two deputy commanders, Zhou Kong and Chen Yunchue, came together with a heavy expression. Su Fengnian already had a premonition, so he signaled the two generals to sit down. As expected, Chen Yunchue told him a piece of bad news. Tian Heng, the commander of the Yuzhou cavalry, split his troops into two groups. He had his deputy commander, Yul Wandao, lead 20,000 cavalry to take a detour and rush out of Calabash Mouth. The old general personally led 10,000 cavalry to block the iron hooves from the Beimang and Liaodong lines. After fighting and retreating 3 times, there were only 4,000 cavalry left. All of them died at the Jitu slope at the border between Yuzhou and Hezhou. Yan Wenwan had no choice but to transfer 16,000 elite infantry from Yuzhou to reinforce the Helan Mountain defense line in the northeast of Yuzhou. During this period, as the Huai provincial governor Kai Nan did not send troops and was determined to watch from the sidelines, the entire Hezhou existed in name only. Wang Sui's cavalry rushed straight to the east gate of Yuzhou. Chen Yunchue sighed. "Although I knew that the imperial court was unreliable, Kai Nan, who had more than 100,000 soldiers, used to be Gu Zhentong's right-hand man. In the end, he did not even have the courage to fight a symbolic battle. I don't know if it was Kai Nan's own idea or if the new administrator, Han Lin, secretly received the order of Graydon City." Partridge Zhoukong snorted coldly and said, "There's no difference. Kai Nan is a dog that Gu Zhentang raised outside. Gu Zhentang himself is not any better. He is also a dog that the Zhao family threw into Liao province. This time, he avoided battle and gave the large river province to Wang Sui with both hands. Kai Nan and Han Lin probably have a tacit understanding. The court hopes that people in northern Liang die. Gu Zhentang wants to preserve his strength so that he can bargain with the Zhao family in the future. Right now, the only true troops under the Gu family's command are the Duo Yen elite cavalry that Tang Tai's Huang raised. If Kai Nan's vitality is greatly damaged, he can forget about returning to Graydon City in a grand manner. If Kai Nan is injured, he will not be able to return to Graydon City." Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "In fact, Kai Nan and Han Lin both want to fight this battle. However, Han Lin wants to fight immediately while Kai Nan is waiting for Gu Zhentong's secret letter." Chen Yunchue and Zhou Kong looked at each other. Zhou Kong was impatient and could not hide his thoughts. He lowered his voice and asked curiously, "Your Highness, is this the spy report you obtained from the Shui room?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Previously, at the escaped summer town at the foot of Wudong Mountain, I had some dealings with Yin Maochun and Han Lin's son and made a shady business deal. This time, Han Lin took the initiative to reveal the true intentions of the central government in the capital. It can be considered a show of sincerity to Bailiang." Zhou Kong said in surprise, "That's strange. Did the Zhao family's son and Gu Zhentong's brains get caught in the door? Why did they suddenly change their minds and become benevolent bodhisattvas?" Su Fengnian hit the nail on the head and said, "Gu Zhentang wants to fight because the situation forces him to. Putting aside the grudge between him and Wang Sui, Dong Yue's son-in-law, Wang Sui's swaggering departure from the Eastern Front is an open slap to Gu Jiantang's old face. No matter how good Gu Jiantang can tolerate it, he still has to consider the opinions of the people in the imperial court. The reason why he wants Kai Nan to fight a little later is that he wants to cooperate with the two Liao border armies to fight a big battle. Before that, he naturally wants Wang Sui to fight to the death with our Yuzhou garrison for a while so that he and Kai Nan can reap the benefits. To Gu Jiantang, this is a great opportunity. Once he succeeds, the situation at the border between the two Liao dynasties will instantly change from a long-lasting stalemate of equal strength to the advantage of the two Liao dynasties. As for the imperial court, Han Lin didn't say much. I can only figure out some of the meaning behind his words. It seems like someone has proposed a very aggressive strategy during the small imperial court meeting. They want to use Ji Bei and Hezhou as bait to lure the enemy deep into the enemy's territory. In order to complete the deployment, not only Kai Nan, but also Yuan Tingshan's remaining private army of Li Jiayan Castle and the newly risen Deputy General of Ji Province, Han Feng, will become involuntary pawns. Zhou Kong clicked his tongue and said, "This is a rare big move in Graydon City. Your Highness, those old fellows who do nothing like Zhao Yao and Yang Shenxing, I don't think they have this kind of courage, do they?" Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment, his face dark and gloomy. Menxia Province's left-scattered cavalry officer Chen Wang, Sun Yin who just got fired from the Imperial College, and Lu Su, the hermit who just got a new master from King of Jing and Zhao Sun. This must be the plan of one of these three people. However, after this plan was proposed, without Qi Yonglong and Huan Wen's approval, without Zhao Yuling and Yin Maochuan's agreement, it is destined that it will not be able to leave the capital and pass it to Han Lin. Zhou Kong said with a strange expression, "Why does it sound like our Beiliang owes them a great favor?" Su Fengnian joked, "You can't say that. Graydon City is a stubborn and willful brat. One day, he suddenly knows how to consider the big picture. While in the end, it is to protect his own interests, it will still surprise the officials beside him." After laughing, Chen Yunchue said worriedly, "Will Wang Sui's army affect the battle at the Calabash Gate?" Su Fengnian nodded and said, "Of course it will, but Wang Sui still can't change the big picture." Perhaps Wang Sui never had this thought in the first place. Yang Yuanzhan, Lu Gue, and Huang Songpu, who has returned, are all obstacles to Wang Sui taking control of Beimang's military power. It is already reasonable for the old woman and the Taiping commandery to have the foresight to come to Yozhou's aid. Just wait and see. As long as the eastern front of Beimang is dragged into a quagmire by Gu Jiantang and Yang Yuanzhan's army is destroyed, Wang Sui will be able to stand out immediately. He will go from being the commander of a single front to a person of power no less than Dong Zhuo. When that day comes, Wang Sui will truly show his abilities. Chen Yunchue sighed emotionally. Huta City was lost at the wrong time, but there is nothing we can do about it. Lu Jinu has already done enough. Now that the war has reached this stage, we can only see who can endure longer. In the established strategy of the senior Beiliang advisors and military leaders such as Li Yishan and Yan Wenwan, although they had long foreseen that Beimang would attack Beiliang from the south with all its strength, they did not know which place to break through. Apart from Lingzhou, Liuzhou and Yuzhou were obviously more logical than Liangzhou, which was at its peak. However, Dong Zhuo had made two unexpected moves. First, he pressed the border on three fronts, minimizing the advantage of a single Beiliang cavalry in one of the battlefields. Secondly, the Beiliang frontier army had the tactical intention of moving around through their own well-developed posthouse routes. Then, he personally oversaw the army on the central front, sparing no effort to attack Huta City without any regard for losses. Moreover, at the crucial moment when the main force of the cavalry outside Liangzhou Pass was quietly rushing to the mouth of the Calabash, he, coincidentally, captured Huta City, which was originally expected to be defended to the death for another 2 to 3 months. Su Fengnian calmly said, "In this war between Beiliang and Beimang, there were actually two turning points. The first was when the Fuling cavalry general Wei Liang rashly attacked. Both sides set up their own ambushes. Looking back now, it was indeed Dong Zhuo who had a bigger appetite at that time. Unfortunately, because that Fuling junior commander Wei Liang interfered at the Crouching Dragon Pass, both sides' plans fell through, inadvertently allowing Beiliang to escape disaster. The second turning point was when Dong Zhuo tried to use Liuzhou as a breakthrough point again, allowing the tens of thousands of Dong family's personal soldiers to secretly leave the central front. In the end, he was stopped by Chu Lushan's 8,000 cavalry. I originally thought that the mouth of the calabash would be the third turning point for Bailiang to seize the initiative. Chapter 1585. Su Fengnian laughed self-deprecatingly. It seems meaningless to talk about this now. Chen Yunchue said seriously, almost 200,000 Beimang barbarians' heads, especially Yang Yuanzhan's head. Your Highness, how can this be meaningless? Su Fengnian was silent for a moment, then said slowly, earlier in the meeting hall, I only said some empty words to boost morale. Since you, Zhou Kong, have taken the initiative to come to me, then I'll be frank. Zhou Kong said resentfully, if you want to beat or scold me, do as you please. I'm already very satisfied that I'm able to walk into this courtyard today without being refused the door. Su Fengnian waved his hand and said, in terms of cavalry, you, Zhou Kong, have gathered 30,000 left cavalry, Qidong's Iron Stupa, Yuan Nanting's White Feather Guard, and He Zhonghu's scattered 40,000 right cavalry. In total there are more than 80,000. It can be said that the majority of Bailiang's cavalry is here. As for infantry, apart from the troops that have entered Huaiyang Pass and Liuya and Fuling towns, Great Ancestor Gu still has 30,000. Old General Chen also brought some Yuzhou infantry with him. It's not wrong that you, Zhou Kong, don't want to hide in the grave area. But Great Ancestor Gu is worried that the 30,000 left cavalry will be used in the exchange of troops. Great Ancestor Gu's words hit the nail on the head. Now, anyone and any soldier outside Liangzhou Pass can die. As long as the new city can be built smoothly before the autumn of the third year of Xiangfu, then it can be considered a worthy death. Then, from now on, with Huaiyang Pass and Grave as the center of attack and defense, all the troops and attacks must be carried out around this principle. Su Fengnian poured a full cup of wine, dipped his finger in the cup, and quickly pointed on the stone table. The first complete line of defense outside Liangzhou Pass is with Huta Town as the core. The cavalry of Liuya and Fuling towns on the two flanks will act as a distraction. Huaiyang Pass, which is located in a dangerous area, and Grave Site and Qingyuan towns, which are more inclined to defense, will act as the second small line of defense under this framework. Even if Huta Town falls, we won't lose everything. Now that we don't have Huta Town, this thorn in our flesh, Beimang's army has spread out on all fronts. Now, excluding Gravesite, not only Huaiyang Pass, but also Liuya, Fuling Town, and Qingyuan Town are facing Beimang's infantry siege. In my opinion, Fuling and Luyang Pass can be lost, but Qingyuan Town cannot fall. If we lose Qingyuan Town, which controls the west gate of Liangzhou Pass, not only will Hezhong's 40,000 cavalry be forced to withdraw, it will also allow Dong Zhuo to attack Liuzhou however he wants. Therefore, Zhou Kong, you need to reinforce Qingyuan Town and intercept Dong Zhuo's cavalry. Not only do you need to stop them from moving south too smoothly, you also need to try to take down this 40,000 cavalry in one go. For this reason, I will ask Yuan Nanting to transfer half of the White Feather Guards to cooperate with you, so that we can form an advantage in the battlefield around Qingyuan Town. Zhou Kong frowned and said, if that's the case, then Gravesite's Gu. Zhou Kong suddenly noticed Su Fengnian's strange look and quickly changed his words. Won't Commander Gu be under too much pressure? With only 6,000 iron stupas and half of the White Feather Guards, Gravesite will completely lose the initiative in the battle. Su Fengnian glanced at the partridge and said in a low voice, therefore, Great Ancestor Gu is paying the price of Gravesite's infantry being beaten like a tortoise, so that you, Zhou Kong, can gallop on the battlefield in Qingyuan. Zhou Kong didn't say anything. Su Fengnian reminded him, Bailiang cares a lot about the gains and losses in Qingyuan, and Dong Zhuo can probably see that whether Qingyuan will become a trap for Beimang to besiege the city and attack the reinforcements will be up to your left cavalry to judge on the battlefield. At that time, I hope that you can resist the military merits of thousands or even tens of thousands of people. Once you fall into the blockade of Beimang's main cavalry, you should know that no one has the ability to make soldiers out of beans, so there's no way to make 30,000 cavalry soldiers for you to send into the Qingyuan battlefield. What's more, after the left cavalry and half of the White Feather Guards are surrounded by Beimang, let alone Qingyuan, Gravesite, Great Ancestor Gu, and old General Chen can only retreat to He Zhonghu's army in one breath, and there's only a newly built city behind us. Zhou Kong suddenly asked in a low voice. In the Battle of Qingyuan, both sides' intentions are still not hidden. I believe that with Dong Zhuo's insight, Beimang's barbarians are very likely to besiege the city and attack the reinforcements. At most, they didn't expect that not only would my 30,000 left cavalry be mobilized, but even the White Feather Guards would cooperate with them. In that case, Your Highness, why don't we just directly target Beimang's ambush? I have confidence in our crossbowmen. In our own territory, we can definitely accurately find out the Baimang's backup plan. Moreover, even if we meet on a narrow path and have to fight in pairs, Dongzhu's crow pen won't be enough. Your Highness, don't worry. I, Zhou Kong, guarantee that I won't act according to my whims. We'll listen to Great Ancestor Gu. All the battles of the left cavalry are to preserve our strength. Su Fengnian shook his head without hesitation and said, fighting this battle in Qingyuan is only to do our best to prevent Bei Mang from being too passive. It's not that I don't want to take risks, it's not that I don't want to gamble with Dong Zhuo on the sand table. It's just that I can't. Bei Mang can afford to gamble, and they can afford to lose. At the very least, they can afford to lose again. But we can't squander even a single opportunity. At this point, Su Fengnian asked with a smile, General Zhou, the toad wants its life and the snake wants its fill. Do you feel very sullen? Zhou Kong chuckled and said, I do feel a little cowardly. But I'm an old soldier who has followed the great general for many years. I know what's important and what's not. But to be honest, after arriving in Bailiang, everything has been smooth sailing for so many years. This time, if your Highness hadn't come to the grave, Great Ancestor Gu might not have been able to stop me. Chen Yunxue, who had been quiet all this time, said thoughtfully, we do need to reflect on ourselves. Your Highness, you've seen and heard with your own eyes what happened in the meeting hall today. Other than Commander Gu, I'm afraid that even I can't stand this. Yes, for the past 20 years, our Bailiang frontier army has been competing with the Baimang barbarians. Not to mention a battle with a few hundred people, we've never lost a battle with more than 10,000 people. So this time, we've suddenly lost Huta City, which greatly reduced the battle results we were about to obtain at Haluku. We seem to be a little stunned. If we can't turn this around, we might suffer a big loss this time. Your Highness, it's not that I, Chen Yunxue, want to flatter you, but you've come at the right time. When Su Fengnian sent Zhou Kong and Chen Yunxue to the door of the small courtyard, he said to Zhou Kong without reason, if Dong Zhuo has set up 2 or more large-scale ambushes in Qingyuan, your left cavalry should consider retreating to the west. If that doesn't work, you can take a detour and return to the grave. Zhou Kong was stunned. The west. Your Highness, if we go further west, we'll be at the border with Liuzhou. Su Fengnian didn't say anything. Zhou Kang's eyes suddenly lit up. He asked carefully, Your Highness, are you saying that we can win the battle at Liuzhou? Su Fengnian laughed softly. Ko Jianghuai and Shi Fu are both generals who can turn the tide. As for whether they can do it, whether they can make the Qingyuan cavalry battle the third turning point of the Liangmang War, let's wait and see. Chapter 1586. In the past, Ningame was able to jump from a lower-class 6th-rank general in the Phoenix Battalion to a lower-class 3rd-rank Iron Buddha deputy general with real power. This was clearly because he was close to Su Fengnian. This time, he was able to be the first to meet the young king. Although it was unexpected, it was within reason. After all, Ningame represented all the young generals that Su Fengnian had promoted in the Bailiang army in recent years. Su Fengnian was especially fond of Ningame. In the eyes of others, it was naturally intentional. Chen Yunxue and Zhou Kong, the 2 highest-ranking deputy generals of the border army in the military town of Sirius Tomb, followed closely behind and appeared to follow the rules. Following this, Su Fengnian met with Qi Danghua, Yuan Nanting, and the others. In the end, he summoned the generals who were stationed in the military town of Sirius Tomb all year round. Su Fengnian was always lukewarm in these closely linked meetings. The generals of Sirius Tomb were not familiar with the temperament of the young king. During this period, there were people who wanted to use bold words to express their loyalty and determination to Su Fengnian. In the end, Su Fengnian just laughed it off and casually changed the topic. This made these people, who had left the traditional officialdom of Bailiang for many years, still feel uneasy when they stood up and left their chairs. They were afraid that their flattery had hit the wrong horse. Fortunately, Su Fengnian personally sent them to the entrance of the courtyard, which made them feel much more at ease. They could not be blamed for thinking too much. Ever since Su Fengnian came to power, there had been a saying in the upper echelons of the border army that the new King Liang was ruthless and generous. And the target of his ruthlessness was precisely them, the generals of the border army. For example, the Huaihua general Zhong Honggu, who treated Lingzhou as his own back garden, did not even have the chance to die of old age. As for the general Yan Wenluan, who was entrenched in Yuzhou, it was said that a lot of his sharpness had been suppressed. Su Fengnian took over the Tiger Pounce camp and supported Yul Wandao. It was obvious that he wanted him to replace Tian Heng as the general of the Yuzhou cavalry. And before this, he transferred away the provincial governor Tian Peifong, who was obedient to Yan Wenluan, and replaced him with Hu Kuei, who was not heavily factionalized and whose faction was unclear. In addition, Su Fengnian's trusted aide, Huang Fuxiong, was placed in Yuzhou's military. And the relationship between great ancestor Gu and Zhou Kong and Chen Yunque, who were deeply rooted in the border army, was so strained. Was there really no incitement from the young king? Otherwise, how could an outsider who had just entered the border army for a few years speak so boldly in the meeting hall of the grave? It was said that now that Wei Tai's Han, Lu Yuanji, Lin Dofeng, and the other elders had returned to the border army, it would undoubtedly weaken the military power of Zhou Kong, Chen Yunque, and the others to a certain extent. But no matter what, with and without Su Fengnian in charge of the grave, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. Regardless of whether or not this shrewd King Liang would take the opportunity to purge the left and right cavalry armies of Liangzhou, as long as he sat in that small courtyard, even if he did not give any specific orders, then the following big battle could be fought. Among the many guests in the small courtyard, only great ancestor Gu was missing. In the end, Su Fengnian did not wait for the deputy commander of the infantry army to take the initiative to visit. After weighing the pros and cons, he gave up the idea of summoning great ancestor Gu. Su Fengnian felt somewhat regretful. Regardless of victory or defeat, in the future, the relationship between great ancestor Gu and Zhou Kong and the other local generals was destined to be difficult to return to how it was before. This kind of parting was not the same as the struggle for benefits between the factions of officials in the imperial court. On the contrary, it was more similar to the apparent unity caused by conflicting political views. The more it was like this, the harder it was to mend it. It was just like how Huan Wen and Zhang Julu, at the last moment of Liang, had gone against each other. It was impossible to determine who was right and who was wrong. Su Fengnian slowly paced back and forth in the small courtyard that had returned to silence. Wang Sui led Bei Mang's elite cavalry on the eastern front to suddenly advance to the west, causing Beiliang to be in a rather awkward situation. This was probably what it meant when the heavens did not fulfill one's wishes. Yan Wenluan had no choice but to split up troops to guard the eastern gate of Yuzhou, where the troops were currently leaning to the north, in order to prevent a fire in the backyard. She was afraid that the entire Lingzhou would be engulfed in smoke. In this way, a few big fish would definitely slip through the gourd's mouth. Perhaps it would be Zhong Tan's private army, or perhaps it would be the Ruren cavalry of Hong Jingyan, or even Yang Yuanzhan himself. However, judging from the current situation, even if Dong Zhuo had realized that the situation at the gourd's mouth was not good and hurriedly sent troops to the gourd's mouth to coordinate with Yang Yuanzhan's troops, it would not change the outcome of the destruction of Liang Mang's main force on the eastern front. Yang Yuanzhan would definitely suffer the consequences of his radical actions of demolishing Huagong and Luanhe cities and burning all the forts and fences. Without these defensive forts that could be used as temporary strongholds of Bei Mang, the pincer attack from Beiliang cavalry and Yuzhou infantry was enough to be fatal. The situation at the gourd's mouth was already set. The key was how many Bei Mang fish Yuan Zuozong and Yul Wandao could catch in the end. One could foresee that Gu Jiantang would take the initiative to attack, and the Kainan and Heji border armies would also block Wang Sui's path back to the east. Everyone could see that this was an opportunity that Beiliang had created for the entire northern front of Liang. However, while Great Peace City was singing the praises of the emperor and Gu Jiantang, they would pretend to be blind and only focus on the fall of Huta City in Liangzhou. Previously, the new Huai administrator Han Lin had vaguely reminded Su Fengnian that the imperial court was pushing to set up Jidushi in the territory of the dynasty. Although they only added one deputy Jidushi to the territories of the various vassal kings to restrict the vassal kings who had always been Jidushi, the person who had the chance to become the new deputy Jidushi was very likely to be Yang Shenxing, who was covered in dirt at Guangling Road. Su Fengnian muttered Yang Shenxing's name a few times. Yang Shenxing was one of the 8 great generals of Liang and was once the local emperor of Jizhou. In the second year of Xiongfu, he lived with his tail between his legs. This time, he risked his life to become the deputy Jidushi of Beiliang. He wanted to atone for his crimes with the young emperor and the Liang imperial court. He also wanted to help his eldest son, Yang Huchen, as the new deputy Jizhou general. Northern Liang, as well as Yang Shenxing herself, the 3 parties were well aware that if they went to northern Liangdao to be a Jidushi, regardless of whether they had the title of deputy or not, their real power would not be comparable to a duwei with the size of a sesame seed mung bean. Maybe Yang Shenxing's request to be demoted to the northwest was because he was prepared to die.